Current chair of the Tourism Business Improvement District. It is 9 a.m. here on Thursday, August 20th. Thank you for joining us. We're going to start off by establishing a quorum and call the meeting to order. I'm going to go through and I think I can see everybody via Zoom, but if you're here, if you could just unmute yourself and just confirm that. Amish Patel. Here. Terry Ennis.
Here.
Hi, Terry. Jones Solu.
Here.
Nancy Dickinson. Are you here, Nancy?
She has a conflict today, Steve.
Got it. No Nancy. Chris Kosteka.
Here.
Hi, Chris. And I believe that's everyone. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We're going to start with a moment of silence. Before the meeting, we discuss, I'm here in Santa Cruz County where there's 10,000 acres burning and there's a lot of folks evacuated, so please keep us in your thoughts. And without saying, this has been a challenging year across the board. So please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you for that. And now let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all. Okay, board member announcements. Please remember to unmute yourself. If you have something, just raise your hand, board, and the floor is yours. Any board member announcements? Well, personally, I was pretty proud of myself. I went through and I read the staff report and I went through the agenda, and then Heather Goodwin sent off about 60 pages of emails last night. So I think we're going to have a productive meeting today. I think we need it. I think a lot of this year has just been dealing with triage and all the effects of COVID, but we've got some really important things to discuss. I'm hoping we're going to have some good comments from the public. So I've got a comfortable chair and we're ready to get started here. So if there are no other board member announcements, are there staff announcements?
None.
None? Okay. I'm going to open it up for public comment. Please just keep it to things that are not on the agenda for today. So if there is any public comment for items not on the agenda, now would be the time.
Anybody in the queue would like to raise their hand for public comment? Chair Allen, at this time, there is nobody with their hand raised.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Moving on to our consent agenda. We need approval of the June TBID meeting minutes. Do you guys all have a chance to review those?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Terry. Any further comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we will approve as submitted. And then the May and June TOT report and year-over-year TOT report. Scott, did you want to speak to that?
I didn't have any prepared remarks, and I don't know if Megan did, but we're happy to answer any questions. And it probably kind of rolls into the first item, B1, which talks about the budget.
You guys should have gotten the spreadsheet in your packet for fiscal year 2019-2020, and then compare it to 18-19.
All I can say is in my almost 23 years of living in Morro Bay, I've never quite seen a report quite like that, where you saw 16% hotel occupancy. I think it really shows how seriously the hotels took the stay-at-home orders and renting only to essential workers. It's a huge hit, obviously, to the city of Morro Bay revenue-wise. When you compound that 10 times for revenue for small businesses, it's a giant hit to our economy. And everyone did what they had to do, I think, during the beginning stages of the epidemic, and we have a long ways to go to recover from it and to make sure that everyone stays healthy. Some of the new, probably, safety and health rules that were followed building up to this maybe should have been followed all the way along, and it's probably a good lesson for society about hand washing and public safety, but there's no way to, the city has to recognize, and the hoteliers and the vacation rental lodging industry overall, coupled with the restaurant industry that impacted them, has to recognize that those days are gone, they're behind us, and there's no way you can get that back. And, we just need to positively move into the future. And, I'm hoping that we can help do that, both for the small businesses and for, our community, because it's a giant hit. We used to say, what would it look like if all the tourists picked up and walked away, and we shut down and we didn't have any tourism? I think we actually are pretty close to having an answer to that question when we look at that 16% occupancy rate. So I just hope that our community can come back from this, and we got to hunker down and go forward. So.
And just putting this in perspective, so March 2020 looks like 31%, March 19, 59%, April, speaking to Joan's point of 19, 16%, April of 2019, a year ago, 70%, May, 65%, last year, May of this year, 40%. And then a little bit of good news, June of this year was 60%, but still comparing that to last June of 2019 was 77%. So, we are seeing an improvement here, but it has been an exceptional year. Any other comment before we approve the TOT report? Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll give a motion to approve the TOT report.
Thank you, Chris. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Joan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Sounds good. Moving on to business items. The first thing we have is the TBID budget review. Scott?
Yes, I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint for the next 3 items, and so we'll just kind of roll continuously through there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so moving on to item B1, and this was discussed, at least the revenue side, just a few minutes ago, but the COVID impacts on last fiscal year and moving into this year are significant. Transit occupancy tax revenues were down 56% for the months of March, April, May, and June of 2020 compared to 2019 for those same 4 months. It equates to $684,000 of revenue we did not realize. In that same period, we closed down $150,000 in tourism business improvement assessment revenues compared to the previous year, which is significant. As stated in the staff report, because of that significant reduction in revenues, we also did our best to really tighten our belt on the expense side. So we had minimal expenses over that same period of time. somewhere in the neighborhood of about $150,000. I want to say it was spent. Typically, over that same period of time, we're spending twice, if not three times that amount. And a lot of those savings obviously come through not doing any paid advertising, no middle marketing contract, and significant reductions in staffing. And I think that was the appropriate move to make, considering how drastic a change we experienced. We did use have used a small portion of TBID funds to support our community through COVID-19. I think it's less than $7,000, and it's primarily to support hand washing stations in the community. And we have committed to, because of how fluid the situation is, and it's unsure if there'll be a second wave of COVID or if COVID will link up with influenza and create a significant impact to our overall way of life and economy. This winter, it's hard to predict. So we're approaching this budget year with the mindset that we'll be making a lot of changes throughout the year. So it's very fluid, and so we want to make sure we're keeping TBID and the other advisory committees and city council up to date and our community up to date on where we're at. So at present, we don't have a lot of information about this fiscal year. The TOT report, as Chair Allen mentioned, is looking better for June and July. What we've seen for July so far through the STAR reports. But even with occupancy going up, the room rates are down compared to last year. So our overall revenues will still be down significantly. We just don't know how bad yet. So we will endeavor to provide regular updates about our expenses as well as revenues to TBID and council. Chuck Davison's on the line here, and if there's questions about some of the sources where this came from, but we've learned from him and others that recent surveys have shown that 50% of Californians, maybe higher, are choosing not to travel at this time for a variety of issues, primarily for health purposes. And with that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be spending dollars when your return at best will be 50%. And that's sort of the party line that's being held throughout the county and a lot of other places at this time. So we're definitely keeping our expenses in check, but want to make sure that as we move forward together and with support from the TBID board. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. We attached the budget report for the whole fiscal year just to show kind of what we projected. Of course, like I said, it's very fluid. And the other attachment shows what we've spent from March to July of 2020, just so you can kind of see how minimal expenses we have and sort of where we're allocating our dollars at this time. If we collect revenues above that amount, that's just going to go into the accumulation fund so that we have that at our disposal when it's the appropriate time to begin ratcheting up efforts on the marketing side. So happy to entertain any questions from the board.
Very rough figures. It sounds like TBID has accumulated about half of typical revenues, but the expenses are also down about 50%. Is that about accurate?
It's in that ballpark. Again, we won't really know. It's forensics, so you got to go back in time to really know what occurred. So we're just sort of projecting. I would say we're trying to align our expenses with our revenues and maybe even lower if possible, so that we can store up savings for when we can really go forward. So that's probably about right, Steve.
Great, thank you.
Scott, there was some general, public comment agenda correspondence that came to us that was not necessarily related to any direct topic, but from Ms. Merrill regarding public restrooms, public restroom cleanliness, and public restroom safety. And, I'm a former hotelier, and hoteliers tend to speak very openly and outright about restroom cleanliness. So I know that this gang here who's staring at me is going, oh yeah, you know, cleanliness is next to godliness when it comes to restrooms. Like, that bathroom has to be spotless. You gotta, you know, and so I have seen these comments coming back and forth. Ms. Merrill has, and I have to commend her. She has done a tremendous job going down the Embarcadero and seeing what's going on with the waste receptacles, seeing what's happening with the public restrooms. And she had some questions in her agenda correspondence, her public comment. Basically, is there any way that the portable restrooms could be cleaned on the weekends? They get cleaned apparently Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Is that correct? And then Saturday and Sunday they don't?
In some cases they do. When I think last week they did come out. Our staff don't have the machinery or capabilities, nor do we want to take on the liability of cleaning porta potties. They have their Roto-Rooter machinery, if you will, that addresses the issue. We're making sure that they're stocked with the appropriate toilet paper and other stuff. That's what we're providing. In addition, I mean, beyond, we're not required to, but we're doing that. Trash receptacles, we've thrown everything we can at this. Our typical monthly bill for trash is about $8,000, maybe $7,000 or $8,000. Now it's over $15,000, and this is at a time where we've cut $2 million or $3 million from our budget. So we don't have money, so we don't know how we're paying for this, by the way. So we're throwing everything we can at it. We're not getting the return on this, as a lot of people who are coming to our town aren't spending money. They're here for the day trip. They're here to go to the beach and nothing else. And so we are ratcheting up expenses and not receiving the revenues to support that. And it's very frustrating. And despite all of our massive efforts and those of our volunteers like Linda, some of our visitors are just, quite frankly, rude, and will throw trash outside their car door when there's a trash can 5 feet away. So a lot of times our community members are like, well, you need to provide more trash. It's like, well, what point is the responsibility on our visitor to literally just get out of their car and throw it away 5 feet away? So, you can sense frustration from me, and that's because we're operating with less people, less revenues, and doing more in this situation, and it doesn't seem to be having the effect, because all it takes is one person to do something like that. We are challenged on the restrooms because the Coleman Beach restroom was taken out of service, and we were in the process of moving forward to get a state grant to begin construction of that, and COVID stopped all those efforts. So we've thrown porta potties at that area. We've thrown porta potties at the Rock restroom and other parts of the front down in the Embarcadero area to try to accommodate for all the visitors. And the trash is really, a lot of that's generated because of more day trips. Most people are either going to the coastline or the mountains, not traveling anywhere else. And there's only dine-out options or takeout options. So a lot of this trash would be kind of received by private trash, if you will, like within restaurants. Now that's all being pushed out to the public. And so our plight is no different than that of Cayucas or Pismo Beach or other portions of the coastline in SLO County. And we're all trying to do our best. And we really appreciate the commentary and the efforts from folks like Linda Merrill. It's really helpful. But it just gives you a little insight into our world. We do talk about trash and restroom far more than I ever thought we would at this point.
Yeah, I do understand your plight. I mean, I get it. Anyone who's owned a business knows that, a guest, literally there can be a waste receptacle right next to their car that they could roll the window down, but they'll open up the door and just throw it out. Yeah. So that's how it goes. But, there's no fixing human nature across the board when it comes to that. But when the restaurants were allowed to expand to outside dining, was there for example, was there a formula used? Like, okay, if you have 4 tables, you need 1 waste receptacle that you're supplying? because I see a lot of added outdoor dining, but because I walk the Embarcadero, I don't see a lot per table. I don't see added waste receptacles. And I feel like if they've added outdoor dining, they should have had to add waste receptacles based on the amount of, per table usage or whatever the formula would be. I'm not the formulaic person, but there should be some type of formula. And then the next question I have, which was in this correspondence, was regarding public restrooms inside of the restaurants. If they are now only takeout and only outside dining, has the city mandated that they open their public restroom if they're open for business? Because that is business and that is their customer.
The city has agreements with leaseholders on the waterfront to provide public restrooms, and I believe those are all still open. I don't know if we can force a private restaurant to provide their restrooms or not. I wouldn't know how to answer that question. Regarding outdoor dining, I think in some setups, sort of self-contained, the tables are out there, and whatever's eaten at that dining establishment is dealt with by the restaurants, but we do also have a lot of just straight takeout places that will have public seating, and so that's, I think, where we're seeing some of the issues. And a lot of people are just taking their food and going and eating out at Rock or Coleman Park or other places. Literally every park we're seeing this impact. It's not just the obvious ones down the waterfront. But Scott Graham is on the call, our community planning director, who might have a little more insight about some of those requirements. But we are really trying to do our best to ease the burden on our struggling businesses and not create onerous requirements and regulations that make it impossible. So it's sort of a balancing act we're all trying to achieve here. But maybe Scott have a little bit more to add to what I said. If not, that's fine.
Yeah, we do have the our temporary use permit program and our blanket encroachment permit program that allows for outdoor dining. And when you receive those permits from us, they're no fee, but when you receive the permits from us, they do require you to identify locations for additional trash receptacles. We don't have a ratio for the number of trash receptacles to tables, but you are required to show them on your plan.
Okay. And then do either of you two Scots know what the additional cost would be to have the portable restrooms cleaned on the weekends? By the company, not by city staff, but by the company.
Yeah, it's significant. It's usually by call out only. Scott doesn't manage that. The Public Works Acting Director Jen Calloway does, so I'd have to ask her. But again, this is one of those things where we're managing a budget. That's already. We're significantly under budget in terms of our revenues, and we're going over the expenses that we budgeted. So we're trying to fine tune and respond to the moment as best we can. So we have had to call them out on the weekends, but it does come at a significant cost. I don't know if they have regular service on the weekend. Typically, how we respond is we just add more porta potties.
Yeah, I saw that we added hand washing stations and that the bid paid for that, and I'm grateful for us doing that, but I'm wondering if the money would be better spent in keeping the restrooms clean on the weekend when the tourists or visitors, even though a lot of them are day visitors, are actually here. Right. I don't know, I just don't know what the costs are. If it's $100,000 for 6 weekends, forget it. We can't, we're not there. We can't do it.
Right. Well, and part of the issue is that there's people have different expectations about. I don't want to get into the details of what a porta potty, when it's quote unquote full or not full. Mm-hmm. Right. For some people, if there's anything there, it's considered full in their opinion. So I think a lot of this is the eye of the beholder, without getting into the details. So it's not ideal to use porta potties, absolutely. And I think we are realizing that our basic infrastructure is not up to snuff with the capacity, the expanded capacity of our visitation. Yeah, so okay. That's a sort of a long run deal, but I can get more information on the the cost. I don't have them on top of my mind right now, Joan, but it's a good question you're asking.
I want to apologize to the board. I know that took up a bunch of time, but it's really important because we continually, I don't know whether you've all seen it, whether all the emails have gone to all of you, but there's a continual community conversation about the state of affairs of the waste receptacles, the trash, what tourists are bringing, but most of them, a lot of the people who come are day visitors. And I think Scott's right. We felt the impact of the state parks being closed. People still want to get to the outdoors. And, unfortunately, the governor has not opened the state parks, which has forced counties and cities to have to deal with the overflow. And that's, I think, what we're experiencing here.
Hey, Joan, I don't think you need to apologize at all. I know we have a huge amount of stuff to cover, but I think this is a gigantic topic. And from a tourism standpoint and long term, we have a short window to deal with this. Because here's my overriding concern when I actually read through all these documents for this meeting. My long-term concern is we're talking about one of our 3 key points marketing in the future is to get our daily rates up. I'll use our hotel as an example. We're discounting our rates a little bit, even though we're running at very good occupancy, because I think our product is not as good. And I don't feel comfortable gouging during a pandemic. And I say the product's not as good because when you walk down the street or the park next to our hotel, there's a dumpster full of trash laying in the park. And the bathrooms are disgusting. And so it's hugely important because because of the pandemic, we have brought in a whole new clientele, which is wonderful. I think it's a good thing, but it's going to be difficult to bring our past clientele back because when they come back and they see Morro Bay looking like a dump, they're not going to want to come back. So we have an opportunity. They don't have an opportunity. We have a problem to address that when our regular guests return to Morro Bay, are they going to be disgusted and leave, or are they going to be impressed and come back? So I do think it's an item that we should consider budgeting towards, and the city, or we're just costing ourselves future revenues drastically more than what an extra bathroom cleanliness and extra dumpsters and extra trash cans would cost now. It'd be tenfold in my estimation, rough guess, over the next fiscal year.
Is it possible to use TBID funds to help relieve some of that issue, since it does help the hoteliers down in the Embarcadero and all tourism to keep everything clean, like you're saying?
At present, your guidelines for TBID is pretty clear that money should be spent for marketing. If you wanted to create a bid for the waterfront, that would be the appropriate place to do that. And just like Downtown SLO has a bid, it's a specific approximation location bid, and the business owners or property owners, depending on how the bid is set up, pay into that assessment, and those assessment dollars could be used for street sweeping, steam cleaning, lighting, etc. The T-bid is for marketing purposes primarily only. So we're out on a limb a little bit by using any funds that we are currently doing for hand washing stations. That's why we're being very careful not to do much more than that. But if the board wanted to move in a direction where you're actually supplying funds to do general services, I think it's getting into a gray area, and you'd have to go back to those who paid the assessment and ask them if they're comfortable with that. Typically, TBIDs don't fund those things. There's very few exceptions to that. Pismo is a bright example. They increased their assessment by 1% for 5 years, generate sufficient revenues to invest in infrastructure projects like the undergrounding, like the Pismo Preserve, completing the purchase of that property, and work on their pier, because those are iconic locations for tourists to come and to stay and to create overnight stays. I think Chris' point is spot on, that if our product begins to slip, it will have an effect on our overall economy as well as those who pay into the assessment. But I think that it's probably not something we want to do overnight without having a lot of thought put into it. The primary issue is that we, at this point, as a city, aren't able to invest more because we're in a position where we're ratcheting down our expenses by 20 or 30%.
just to be clear, a lot of this additional trash is being generated by day trippers coming from the inland areas, getting out of the heat, going to the coast, and they're not necessarily staying in hotel rooms overnight, correct?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be able to give you numbers, but I do believe just, the occupancy is still below where it was last year, but the overall visitation is way up. So I think I just deduced from that the most of the increase is coming from day trippers. Now, we've always had folks come from the valley or come from within the county or even Morro Bay, go to the beach when it's really hot. That's always going to happen. It's just the numbers are significantly higher, it seems. Right. Like usually we have some peak weekends and it's like, wow, that was crazy. And then next week and not so bad. It just seems like it's been on a upward trajectory since Memorial Day weekend with a few dips like 4th of July for whatever reason.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah. One other thing I wanted to address, because I know personally I've gotten several emails from Morro Bay hoteliers questioning why we're still collecting so much revenue and we're not marketing. I know Chuck Davison, the executive director for Visit SlowCal, is available. It would be great if Chuck could speak a little bit as to what they're doing on a county level in terms of marketing and their budget. And just so we're not reinventing the wheel, I know Chuck has been a great resource the past couple of months, just giving myself and Scott Collins advice. So Chuck, can you speak a little bit to what's going on with the county?
Hi, Steve. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Good morning. If I could pause for 1 second and just go back to the previous conversation you were having. This is a really important conversation that we're having internally and with some of the communities as well. I want to echo the point that Chris made of there is huge risk right now. As we think about, our marketing strategy for this next year is to really try to continue to target consumers with a higher dollar amount spend. And as those customers are introduced to our community, if they find themselves in these communities where these trash issues and disrespect for our home is occurring, it's going to be really problematic long-term for our destination. And it's really problematic when you think about your brand as a destination. And so we've been having some internal conversations about how we can press in with both Scott and Jim Lewis in Pismo Beach, along with up in Cayucas, to solve for that. To Scott's point, you can see in the, you all have access to the community dashboard that we publish every month on the 27th with all of the data points. You can see in there in our coastal communities the heavy increase in day traffic that's coming in. We track that through Arrivalist, right? So if you're not familiar with Arrivalist, we spend a very significant amount of money on that technology every single year. It allows us to see anybody who's in a destination in 15-minute increments based on their cell phone use. If you're not familiar with this, Google is tracking your every single move based on your Google profile attached to your cell phone, regardless of who your carrier is. So we can give you input and output data, where these individuals are coming from, how long they're in market, whether or not they're day visitors or overnight, what their cross visitation is to another community that you are attached to. So if they're in Morro Bay, are they also going to Cayucas or Los Osos or whatever that looks like? Really rich data that helps prove the point that Scott is making. So we've been talking about this kind of keep us open, do the right thing, respect our home campaign in market. Obviously our work is traditionally done out of market, but how do we get these individuals who are coming to our community to respect the fact that this is where we live? And if they continue to make these decisions, it could have a long-term effect on whether or not places like Morro Bay choose to close a beach because they can't maintain it anymore. So just wanted to put that out there. Steve, to your question on the marketing side, I was in Huntington Beach last week with Carolyn Batetta from Visit California and 10 of my counterparts. I'm on the CEO Leadership Coalition for Visit California. It's 15 of the 101 CEOs in tourism across the state. We meet quarterly. This was our first meeting, obviously, since the COVID outbreak. And, we are really leaning in, as are the majority of the tourism community, to Visit California's lead. Visit California is if you're not familiar, is a department of the state of California government. Carolyn Batetta reports in to Governor Newsom. So the governor has been a little obviously restrictive on, not wanting to get messaging out there too fast. But as that begins to open up, Visit California is scheduled to launch their advertising campaign on the 30th of this month, of which we have a major buy-in. Our campaign will actually launch the following week, post Labor Day. But we're really, and that's all kind of up in the air right now, because to the point that Scott made earlier, the current numbers, the current Adara consumer sentiment research right now shows that in the state of California, more than 50% of people are not willing to travel. And so the risk becomes with this, when we go out and we start spending money to try to attract people to the destination, when 50% or more are not willing to travel, we're throwing away 50% of our money the moment that we launch the campaign. And none of us, in this county have enough money to do that. So we're really trying to be prescriptive in making sure that we are lining our efforts up. Our campaign has been completed. I will tell you, it's been revised 4 times since the month of April. The campaign we had to remove crowds from the campaign. We feature all 7 of the unique municipalities in the campaign, and we had to, in cases like the city of SLO, where we would show the farmers market, that had to go away. We can't show that anymore right now. And so, we've had to make alterations to our campaign throughout this last several months. The campaign is sitting on a shelf ready to go. We are running SEM. So we're doing search engine marketing because we want to make sure that the people who are looking for this destination, we're also doing search engine marketing against people who are searching Santa Barbara and Monterey. So we're making sure that people who are looking for vacation, looking for getaway, that we're out in front of them and remaining top of mind in their consideration set. We're doing some limited social right now, some limited paid social in geographical locations throughout the state, but we won't really get into a heavier campaign until the beginning of September. And that campaign again we will only run based on the Visit California Co-op. We will not launch digital. Our large spend digital campaign is not going to launch right now, simply based on consumer sentiment. We're really holding that back too. I mean, the market is definitely struggling, but I will tell you, after coming out of that meeting last week, doing significantly better, obviously, than places like Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Diego, who are very convention and event driven. You think of a place like Anaheim that is convention and Disney. Disney is closed, conventions are closed. Why would you go to Anaheim? We are reaping the benefit. This has been a difficult destination to get to, in the 6 years that I've been in this role. That's now paying off for us, that it's such a difficult destination to get to. Everybody wants to come here because we're so far removed from what's happening in the normal world. So we're also trying to balance the fact that the numbers are performing better than I think any of us would have expected right now. The tourism economics forecast that we did for a 24-month period that we pushed out to all of you in June showed that we probably wouldn't get to 60% occupancy countywide until March of next year. We hit 60.4% occupancy in the month of June countywide, and ADR was only off by 3.4%. Now, that's not reflective of obviously what's happening in the northern part of the county up in Paso Robles, where they were off much larger than that, simply based on not having events and it being very hot up there. So we're also trying to be cognizant of holding some of that money back so that when the leisure market does begin to leak or slow, we can launch a major campaign to try to make that attraction at a time when it really makes sense. So, Steve, I know that's not a crystal clear, hey, here's the push button answer for where we are, but we're really trying to be mindful of following the state lead, using our money extremely wisely, and making sure we're in a position to take advantage of and for the market at the prime time when it's really going to make a major difference. Happy to take any questions on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. Speaking specifically for some of the stakeholders in Morro Bay and hoteliers, as a budgetary process with Visit SlowCal, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of the same things, revenues down, and you're cutting expenses, and you're preparing the market, it sounds like. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So remember, when the pandemic struck in early March, we cut our staff by 60%. We all took a 20% pay cut, and we froze all spending and all initiatives. So we continue to live in that world where, yes, we're operating, with less dollars. We obviously, there was a time when there was conversation happening in the communities about, deferment of TOT and possible deferment of the T-bid and things like that. And we really pressed into our investors at the direction of our board. Remember, our board is made up of 19 people, 18 of which are lodging investors, one which is the county appointed government seat. So, we take our direction from our board. We really pressed in on, continuing to push the lodging investors to send in their TMD so that we could build the revenue in order to be able to make sure that when the time is right, we are in a position to market. Now, all that said, I think all of you know we're doing a bunch of other stuff, right? We reinvested in this research to create these community dashboards so that you had data that you could use to help inform the business decisions that you had to make. We're obviously weighing in very heavy on the advocacy side, not only the work that we do with Morro Bay, but we're sitting at the table with the county on restrictions that they, have put in place. You'll all remember the 50% occupancy. We worked with them through that process, working with the state right now. There's a whole series, you probably know, there's 7 legislative bills and a number of propositions that are up on the ballot in November that could have a detrimental impact to tourism. Prop 15 probably being the largest one of those that would severely tax ownership of business property throughout the state of California. So we're pressing in, on that side as well. And so, we continue to do a number of things in addition to, prepping for the marketing work, which is why, those dollars are so important to us. And I would encourage that they are equally important to the Morro Bay T-bid to be able to have those funds available the moment the market allows for traditional marketing and advertising to begin.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions for Chuck or comments on the budget?
Yeah, I caught one thing and wrote it down actually, Chuck, that you said, which was there's a campaign between Pismo, Cayucas, Morro Bay, the coastal communities that through SlowCal, you're saying, keep us open, do the right thing campaign is what you said?
Yeah, so there's not a campaign yet. This is what we are pressing into with the city. So we're hearing this at large. You may have, you probably didn't because it was only an hour ago. NPR locally ran a news story this morning at 8:05 about the trash on the beaches in Morro Bay and Pismo Beach and the press back from the residents. We've been working with NPR on a number of stories. This one we were not a part of, but I will say from what the team has told me, I haven't had a chance to hear it. They painted it in the best light it could be painted in, so thank goodness for that. But our thing is, Joan, we know exactly what Scott said. Cities are cutting back. They're not in a position to reinvest in some of this stuff. And for us, similar to the note that I made earlier and the note that Chris made, this is extremely problematic for this destination long term when we talk about our brand, if we can't get our arms around this. So we are I will be having this conversation with our executive committee on Monday. Fortunately, our executive committee of the 5, 2 are in Pismo Beach and 1 is in Morro Bay when we talk about the representatives on our committee. So, they obviously have this at heart as well. And I think, there's I take my direction from the board, but I think there's a need for Visit SlowCal to try to figure out how we can get involved, if nothing else, through messaging to try to get these individuals who are coming to our community to respect the place that we call home. So we're not there yet. And I agree with Scott Collins that, this is not, we do not want to be shooting from the hip on this. We want to, this problem is not going to go away in the next month. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about it reasonably, but putting it into action sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I was thinking that somehow with our limited funds that we have, we've supported the hand wash stations, but if there is something that we can, these are fellow Californians. Hello, these are mostly fellow Californians trashing their own state.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. So it is frustrating as, you know, a lifelong Californian to see my neighboring cities, folks visiting, doing that. And I'm wondering, the two Scotts are on the line and, you know, in this meeting, maybe we do, and I'm not a huge proponent and fan of banners and signs, but maybe we could do something down by the rock, by the beach, where we put on the back of the benches that we already have out there something that says, you know, keep this, Californians, keep this beach open by, you know, doing your part, picking up the rubbish, picking up your own rubbish, or using a waste receptacle, whatever the words are, because you know, that may help, or some type of poster that we can maybe laminated, put on those open dining areas in the parks, like Anchor Park or something, that could be taped down onto the table that says, fellow Californians, do your part, keep this park open, keep it clean. I mean, and that to me that's good marketing right now, going back to Chris's point. Like, how do we keep this place clean for the future?
That's exactly what we're talking about. And we would be happy. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb before I even talk to my executive committee and say we would be happy to help create that messaging and make that available. I do want to encourage you. We had this conversation internally yesterday. I think this is one of the challenges that the communities have created for themselves. The messaging that is out there is only in English. The messaging needs to be bilingual. We're missing that in our communities. And so, you know, when we talk about just diversity, you know, we can't have it one way and not have it another way. And so we've got to make sure that when we're putting that message up, that it's done in a way that more than just English speaking people can understand.
I totally agree.
Yeah, we launched a Heroes program a couple weeks ago, and the first leg of that was our Mask Hero program. So our police department, you know, is going down in the Embarcadero area and encouraging folks to wear masks and handing them out when they're not, but also taking photographs with people who are and giving the stickers that, you know, say you're a mask hero. And the second leg of that is trash, and so we have those signs up on the dumpsters, because I think a lot of times people don't want to throw something away in the dumpster because they think it's a private trash can. And so we put big banners around that saying be a trash hero, and here are the things to throw away, not obviously stuff from your home, but, you know, takeout material mostly. And we're also going to be putting up flag banners down by the rock to mirror that message. Never thought I'd have to put up a sign to tell somebody to throw something away, but that's the world we live in, as was mentioned before. And so, but the excellent point by Chuck about the Spanish piece or other languages, I hadn't even thought about that. Thank you for that.
Any other questions, comments for Chuck or Scott, or input on the budget?
I just had a quick question. We're definitely seeing a whole new visitor here in Morro Bay. I was wondering if Chuck had any insights as to the visitor profile. Are we seeing more of a younger population travel, people with you know, mid to low spending budgets, daily travel? Just kind of general, what is the visitor profile right now as to what we had before?
Yeah, thanks, Amish. It's exactly what you're seeing in Morro Bay and the other coastal communities. We continue to hear from hoteliers the frustration with the guests that they are receiving. And part of that, again, is based on the fact that marketing is turned off. We are normally communicating with a different audience than what's coming to the market right now. We're not communicating with those customers, and so they're not, you know, by default, many of them are not coming. To the point, I think that I think it was Steve who made, you know, right now you're seeing, you know, huge temperatures in the inland parts of the state, and that is going to drive, regardless of whether that is the customer we're trying to attract, that is the customer who is coming right now and going to continue to come. And so part of that, you know, the balance of that comes when we open up marketing and, you know, I'm sorry to put it this way, but some of those individuals end up getting priced out, because as we build this base of higher targeted, higher valued consumers, that's going to add to your ADR, and that's going to cause rates to escalate, and in turn there's a percentage of people who won't come. What we have heard from a number of our hotel partners up and down the coast is, especially with these unemployment payments, they're seeing a lot of people who are coming who might not normally come and pay those fees. But what's happening is, look, Pismo Beach got $299.58 on Friday and Saturday a week ago. That was the ADR in the community for that week. But what we're being told by those hoteliers is there's 6 to 8 people staying in that room. And so that's the impact that we're seeing in the market. Not only day visitors, but even number of occupants per room has increased, which, going back to what Scott's saying, is putting more people on the beach in the services than, occupancy is lower, but on a per person count, we have more people in the market. And so that's what's creating so much of the challenge. I will say that that's not what we're seeing in North County. Again, much smaller visitation, but different market, right? We don't have people from the Central Valley that are going to Paso to drink wine because it's 110 degrees in Paso and they just left 115 in Fresno. So it's a different, they're seeing a different mix in those markets, although, in a much smaller quantity.
Do you expect other drive markets in California to increase, such as maybe from the Monterey North and Santa Barbara South?
Yeah, so I think, for us, I think there's a couple things at play right now. We saw this 2 years ago with the mudslides in Santa Barbara and the fires. There's a really good chance we're going to start to see some leakage down to our market, especially from the north with what's happening in Sonoma, Napa, and Monterey right now. All of you who are sitting here, it appears it's going to rain outside. However, there's not a cloud, right? And so, the longer these things continue to play out, 357 fires burning in the state of California today, right? That we could see some leakage to our market if we avoid, fires here just because of people who are pushed. But I think the question that nobody in tourism has their arms around right now is, what does the school at home, work at home model look like as we head farther into the fall? Pismo Beach is talking about launching a kind of school work play campaign for their market. They're seeing the CBB reported out yesterday that they're seeing a lot more families, in the market where the kids are, sitting in the lobby trying to do their schoolwork and stuff like that. And, that could be a good opportunity. We've seen it obviously in the vacation rental space, continue to get swallowed up with their supply. And so I think that's the question that remains right now is, does the leisure travel that would traditionally end in September and October really end? Or does it get extended based on, the current framework of the crisis? And honestly, there's no research and there's no baseline. And so I hate to acknowledge this, but your guess right now is going to be as good as ours. We want to continue to make sure that we have those dollars available in the bank so that the moment the slide does, start with occupancy, we're able to quickly try to prop that up in the event that the state, allows us to do that from a leisure travel standpoint.
Great, thank you, Chuck. I'm going to keep everybody moving along because we've got a couple really large items here on the agenda. So if there's not any further questions for Chuck or Scott on the budget, do we open up for public comment on this, Scott?
Yeah, as a general business item, yes, I would do that now.
Okay. Any public comment on the budget review?
Mr. Chair, there are people in the queue. Nobody has their hands raised at this time. If you would like to speak, please press your hand raised.
And this is specifically speaking to the TBID budget at this time.
Chair Allen, I see nobody with their hand raised at this moment.
Sounds good. I don't think we need a motion or we're approving anything at this time, correct, Scott?
That is correct.
Okay, so moving on to B2, Tourism Stakeholder Group Report and Recommendations. Scott?
Yes, I'll put back my screen here. 1 second. See it okay?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you. All right. So item B2 is the tourism stakeholder group report and recommendations. A really good segue from the previous conversation we just had about what's going on in the world and everything being topsy-turvy and uncertainty. And now is an opportune time to really kind of take stock and look at how we want to move forward. The COVID-19 impacts have been significant on this organization as well as the tourism function. We've reduced staffing, no paid marketing at this time, and a lot of uncertainties. But it does provide an opportunity to take stock where we're at, to review our vision, the strategies and tactics in play, as well as our organizational structure. We aren't always afforded that opportunity, especially when we're in an annual assessment process where we're continually kind of starting and stopping, as it were. This is a unique opportunity to take stock. The TBID Advisory Board and Council supported creation of a stakeholder group to review these opportunities, and I moved from that and convened a group of a pretty diverse group of folks in our community that have expertise in this industry. Chuck, who you've heard from already today, Davison, the CEO of Visit SoCal, and Derek Kirk also stood in for him a couple times. Joan Solo is our TBID board community member. Unfortunately, in the report, I had her incorrectly labeled as a hotel operator, which was untrue. Hamant Patel, who's a hotel owner operator and Visit SoCal board member. David Peters is a restaurateur. Steve Allen, our TBID chair and hotel operator. Terry Ennis is our TBID chair and our short-term vacation rental representative on the board. Stephen Pack, chamber board president, and Maggie Jern, who's a short-term vacation rental owner-operator. So the stakeholder process, we met 5 times over the course of June and July, and was facilitated by a professional facilitator, Kathleen Markove. We reviewed material, best practices, had presentations from various folks, engaged in surveying, and deliberated on the following topics, or kind of use these questions to springboard into recommendations. Questions about what we should continue doing, what we should stop doing, what we should start doing, what are our ultimate hopes for marketing, when and how and where do we market again, and what's our factors of success moving forward. Again, we have a unique opportunity to really pause and check into this. And so the group was really, really helpful in thinking through these bigger issues. So they spent the course of 3 or 4 meetings kind of talking about all these things and then pivoting and then creating recommendations based on the good conversations that we had. So the first recommendation follows along the lines of what we just discussed in the item B1, and is really about diversification of our visitation. We're in a unique position now with COVID and all the impacts that we discussed, but even prior to, we had sort of pigeonholed ourselves in some respects, whether it was earned or not, as a low-cost accommodation or budget accommodation, despite the fact that we have a charming and beautiful community and natural surrounding, very unique destination with an authentic experience that's real, and marketing can match that. But we still have this moniker being a low-cost or budget destination. And so the intention here is to diversify our visitation and around kind of the spectrum of income. Diverse visitation has a cascading benefit effect, not only for hoteliers and vacation rental owners and RV park owners, but also the community and our local economy and the city through revenues. They all sort of mutually support each other. But in order to make that move, it requires commitment from the public and private sector. We did talk a lot this morning about some of the obvious things like trash and restrooms, but there are other things like parking accommodations, traffic, streets, roads, amenities, those kind of things on the public side, and the services that support all that, but also private investment in hotels, facades, their room upgrades, and new development. Those things all need to go hand in hand. And it also extends beyond just hoteliers and vacation rental owners. It's also the supporting industries like restaurant and retail, and making sure we have a good mixture of opportunities. So it's really a holistic thing. And then, of course, we need the support from our community for those investments. And tourism can be a great thing for a community, but it also has some downsides. And so are we managing our tourism effectively, which gets back to destination management with what Visit SoCal engaged in earlier this year. There's a lot of things we can learn about that, because if tourism is only working for the industry and not for the community, it's not in balance. So all these things kind of have to move forward together. And there's also discussion about not only making those investments, but in the meantime, checking into how we are marketing. Are we marketing effectively to the folks we want to bring in? And really need to take the long view and build up upon previous marketing efforts where we're starting to make those inroads into other markets and really push forward on that. So that was the first recommendation. And from that flows the next two. So if we have an idea of where we want to go, how do we get there? First part of that is the law that we operate under as a TBID. Right now we operate under the 89 law, which means every year we go back to the stakeholders and ask for their approval through a protest process to re-engage the bid for another year. That takes a lot of time, and that takes time out of not only the efforts we're involved in at the moment, but also thinking long term. So literally every single year you're sort of justifying your existence. And the group felt that based on the Visit SoCal model and what they've been able to accomplish through a 5-year window, to move to the 94 law for bids, which allows for an initial 5-year assessment period. And different from 89 as well, is you have to actually go out and get the support of the stakeholders who pay into this. So you need a pro vote of 50% or more, whereas 89 law is a less than 50% collective protest, then you can proceed forward. So it has that more of that engagement, more of that buy-in, because you actually have to support it proactively. And it provides that longer term horizon to engage in those strategies about pivoting and moving in a different direction. In a 1-year horizon, you're really not going to see those trends, but over a 5-year period of time, you can. And you align your tactics and your marketing dollars and everything else accordingly. And then last but not least, kind of correlated with that change to the 94 law, is looking at transitioning the current functions of tourism in a different direction. Right now, the city oversees the day-to-day tourism marketing function. It has provided stability because you have the entire city kind of organization and support. There's connectivity to the other economic development strategies that they're working on, whether it's through the chamber or the community planning department, or events through the recreation department. It has created a sense of collaboration and camaraderie within the organization. So that has definitely been a plus. The other side of that is that there's a lot of process, obviously, with city government. We operate differently than the private sector or nonprofit sector. So there are times where we can become bureaucratic, and when things need to be moving quickly, to adjust to uncertainties or changes in the market, we're not able to do that quite successfully. No fault of the city alone. It's just the fact that we have different processes in place to account for accountability and transparency with the public process. So with taking that in mind and looking at other models like Visit SoCal, what's going on in Paso and other places in the state, the group recommended transitioning that day-to-day oversight to a nonprofit board of lodging representatives, like it was prior to the city taking over in 2016. The general feeling of the stakeholder group was that would provide greater voice and accountability for those who collect and remit the TBID assessment, the greater flexibility because of a different process with the nonprofit compared to a city organization. And the city would still maintain a supporting or advisory role, even going so far as to have either a city manager or a council member on the nonprofit board just to provide that connectivity. But we are invested in the success of this, whether it's with the city or not. So you still have that ability to connect into the stability of the city organization. So from there, the group put together a report which is attached to the staff report. Obviously we want to hear from the TBID, the full board, to get your take on it. You did have 3 members participating in that stakeholder group, and provide recommendations. City Council would review whatever you submit forward. If there's support on the council to move forward any of these initiatives, we really do need to find champions who can take up the mantle. Obviously the city manager and staff will support where we can and help if their transition is where we want to go. But there has to be a recipient on the other end who's going to take the ball and run with it. Last thing we want to do is hand it off to a theoretical individual or group, and there's nobody there receiving it, and the whole thing fails. And we can't have that. That can't occur on my watch, at least. So, we have to think about who's going to take this up and run with it, both during the transition period, but also the long view, because we have to be able to think along longer segments of time than month-to-month TOT reports. This has to be a 2 to 5 year, even further outlook if we really want to drive changes that we need to see in our community and within the tourism industry. So the ideal transition date for moving in this new direction would be July 1st, 2021, which would be the next fiscal year. That way you would stay on that budget cycle year after year. We would need to probably engage outside support or consultant support for the transition to the 94 law and a creation of a nonprofit board. And we actually do have an individual from Civitas, Nicole, who's on the line here. Nicole Farley, she talked with Steve Allen and I several times and put forward a draft proposal to kind of get an understanding of what the process would look like to do the conversion to the 94 law, as well as the nonprofit board creation. There's a lot of steps involved in that. And then recruitment for an executive director, and also at the same time, strategic plan revision. We have a strategic plan we operate under. There's a lot of good information in there. A lot of this stuff is already there, but the overall strategy of pivoting to a diversification of our visitation, I think, needs to be an added element to that, so that whoever takes this over when the 94 law triggers, they have a good game plan to work from. They don't have to create it from scratch. TBID funds would need to be utilized to support these functions that I just outlined: recruitment for an executive director, the conversion, and revision of the strategic plan. All told, that's in the neighborhood of $50,000 to $100,000 for all those things. So that's obviously an important point of conversation for the TBID board, given sort of our constrained resources at this time. We would continue our current efforts under the 89 law with our existing staff, being Megan primarily and myself supporting her, as well as our marketing agency we could use once marketing efforts can and should begin again. So I know that's a lot to digest. I hope you had time to review the really good work of the group with the attached report, as well as the survey that was part of that. So with that, I'll entertain any questions you guys have. And again, Chuck was on that committee, so he provided us with a lot of really good information. And we have Nicole from Civitas, if we want to talk about kind of what that process looks like, if we started tomorrow, what it would take to get to the finish line of converting to a 94 and with a nonprofit board. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair Allen, to see if I missed anything, since you were part of this group, and go from there.
Thank you, Scott. And before, we are going to bring Nicole on to speak, but from a 30,000-foot view, let me just tell fellow board members, we spent a lot of time on this since we've last met. We've been meeting weekly. We did have a facilitator who helped guide us through this process. Weekly, an hour or more discussing all of these things. And I can tell you, Joan and Terry were there as well, but by the end, it was unanimous. All those names on the committee were really aligned, and that's rare. I've sat through a lot of different boards and committees, but to have everybody on the same page, speaks volumes. I really like the idea, number one, because I think it would let TBID pivot more, especially in times like we've gone through in the past few months here. Scott used the term avoiding bureaucracy, but also just having more advocacy. I think we're so aligned with the city right now, which obviously has its benefits, but it also puts us in an awkward position when we're fighting to keep hotels open and, the state or the county aren't aligned with those goals as well. So it's sometimes it's conflict. And so I think if we can cut our expense, we could be more fluid in the future, and we could really budget for a long-term 5 years. I know the past few years we waste a meeting or two just renewing the TBID annually, so we could avoid that going forward too. So some really good things. It's a lot of change, but I think it's change for the better. So does anyone have any opening comments, or can we bring in Nicole from Civitas to kind of talk about next steps? Okay, Nicole, you want to speak a little bit now about what the next steps would be in this process if we choose to go forward?
Yeah, thank you and good morning, Chair Allen and the TBID Advisory Board. Scott, thank you for the good introduction of the project. I felt like you did half of my job already. But really what Civitas is looking to propose, if you guys do choose to move forward with your TBID conversion from the 89 Act, which does require an annual renewal, which has been mentioned multiple times, and is really kind of housed within the city right now, to a tourism business improvement district established under the Property and Business Improvement District Law of 1994, which would allow for you guys to, as mentioned, to expand your term out to 5 years. There is still an annual check-in process with the city council members through an annual report process, but it really does allow you guys to pivot that city-managed TBID into a ownership association, nonprofit organization managed tourism organization with these TBID funds. Some of the things that are going to be much different for you as you look to convert is you will have a management district plan that is a key component of the 94 Act TBID. And that management district plan really becomes the legal framework of how you will be managing your assessment funds, those TBID funds moving forward. So that management district plan really highlights all of the key parameters from the assessment rate to the programs and services that you guys look to facilitate over the 5-year term, the term limit. We're going to call out the organization who's going to be responsible for managing those funds. So that new nonprofit organization, that is, the framework of what you as the lodging industry will support through a petition process. Right now, when you guys renew your 89 Act, there is only a majority protest period where if a majority of you lodging businesses decided not to renew the district, you protest and city council cannot renew. Well, with the 94 Act, we're going to come to you before we ever get to that protest period to ask you to sign a petition to support the management district plan and the parameters of the TBID before we go to the city council and ask them to take up the adoption of a new TBID under the 94 Act. And so the timeline that we look to when we're converting from an 89 to a 94 is, and with the formation of a new nonprofit organization to manage the new TBID, is really 7 months for Morro Bay is what we're projecting. And we feel confident in a 7th-month timeline, knowing that you guys have a history of a TBID, you guys have the relationships with the hoteliers, and you're really not looking to make any huge modifications to what you're currently doing today, that there's going to be some consistency in the assessment rate moving forward over the next 5 years, and your programs and services are going to be relatively the same. So a lot of what we take on of the drafting all of the legal documents, we really feel confident that we can get started on those within the first 6 weeks of working with you to confirm that what you're doing today is what you want to continue to do. And if there are any ideas or goals over the next 5 years as it relates to tourism, that we make sure that we incorporate those within your management district plan. And in working with the city to finalize that document and the committee, we lead into a petition process. And the relationships that you have today with the lodging community are going to better serve you when you're communicating them about the change of the TBID and when we come back and ask them to sign a petition in support. Because the more you do now and the better that relationship is today, the quicker you're going to be able to get through your petition process, which allows us to move into the public hearing phase of the project. And that public hearing phase, we do go before City Council for 3 meetings. And there is a 45-day required period between the resolution of intention, where the City Council will be adopting this resolution of intent to modify and convert the district to the 94 Act, and the final meeting where, as long as there's no protest, the council can adopt the resolution forming the new TBID under the 94 Act. And in between all of that process, we'll be working with you guys if you choose to adopt a new nonprofit corporation to set that up by drafting your, filing your new organization with the Secretary of State, your Articles of Incorporation. We'll be working with you to draft and approve your bylaws, appoint a new board of directors, filing all of your statement of informations, getting your EIN numbers, and then eventually applying for your nonprofit status with the IRS and the state franchise tax board. So that's what we have provided to Chair Allen and Scott in terms of a proposal. It is, like I said, we're projecting about 7 months. Total cost, including expenses, would be just shy of $50,000. We're projecting $47,000 for that, with about $42,000 in professional fees and estimated expenses being about $5,000, but those always fluctuate, and we try to come in under estimated expenses, so it'd most likely be less than $47,000 for the total project. So with that, I will turn it back over to you guys and open it up for any questions on the process that we're proposing.
Thank you, Nicole. Questions or comments?
I definitely think that's a good idea to move from the 89-94. I think that 5-year time frame would allow us to complete more and not have to worry about constantly renewing our budget or our finances every year. There's one more thing I had in mind, but kind of went over me. If I realize it, I'll speak again.
Sounds good. Thanks so much. John, I know you were on the board. Terry, Chris, do you have any questions, comments?
I just real quick, just want to thank you guys. This stakeholder group put in a lot of work, and it shows, and we're appreciative of all your efforts.
Great. Thank you.
I would just say that I'm new on the TBID, obviously, but I've heard the frustration of not being able to get things done with having the yearly renewal, and I think that the 5-year plan will allow TBID to project their projects further out and be way helpful.
One other thought real quick is I would like to hear Chuck's take on that, because I do believe that SLOCAL works with this model.
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of the 94 Act. We're one of only 2 TBIDs in the county, us and Paso Robles, who recently moved to the 94 about 2 years ago. I think there's just so many things, to the points that both Scott and Nicole have made, the amount of stakeholder engagement that has to take place, on the 89 Act, even though it's a protest against the time that has to go into that process on an annual basis. But the biggest driver for me is really around, and this has been an encouragement that I've had from Morro Bay for the last couple of years, is really around getting to a multi-year viewpoint of where you want to take the destination. You are in the best position of any community right now to grow and advance your market in ways that haven't really been seen in recent times here in SLOCAL. And I think having a 5-year runway where this board can really establish the goals and directions and KPIs that they want provides a unique opportunity. The other big selling point for me with this is I really believe, I think you've had, strong tourism management in the past, but I believe that Morro Bay deserves a really tremendous tremendous executive director to run your organization. And I think when you set yourselves up in something like the 94 Act, where you have a 5-year runway, you have the ability to be more strategic. You have the ability in this case for Scott and the city's willingness to push this out of the city and take it back to a nonprofit. I think you really put yourself in a great position to establish a great leader for your community to help you accomplish what needs to be done.
Perfect. Thank you, Chuck. And without saying, with everything else going on in the world, it's probably a very opportune time to find the right executive director that can help Morro Bay. And I know that Chuck and Nicole, have some recommendations for that process as well. Any other questions or comments?
No, I just want to say thank you to the group and actually to the TBID board. This is going to take some championing and finding the champion within finding at least a champion within our own board is, going to be imperative. And it's going to take some groundwork. And I like the timeline of 7 months. I think it's plausible, it's completely doable, and I think that the outcome and the goal and the ability for the bid to help achieve economic stability, to help achieve in the tourism industry economic stability for Morro Bay, exactly what Chuck said, by finding a diverse, dynamic team that would lead this and keeping the city included. I mean, the city oversight of this does not go away at all. It is not diminished in any capacity. The city council still has to approve this 94 Act. They still have a voice at the table, and there can still be the synergy that Scott was talking about between the Recreation and Parks departments and community development and other executive directors at the chamber. And, all the heavy lifting can get done together as a team. And I just see us as a community, if we move to a 5-year goal and a 5-year window, we'll be so much more successful than we've ever been. We have the opportunity to really grow through that. So thank you.
Thank you, Joan. And I think we're ultimately, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, looking for a motion as a recommendation for City Council.
Yeah, and before you do that, I would open it up to public comment. But yeah, I think as Nicole mentioned, I mean there would be multiple touch points with this board and its council, but ultimately we'd like to know if this is supported by the full board, TBID board. Obviously, you have one member absent today. But that would be a great start to this process. And then, of course, City Council would make the ultimate decision if they want to proceed down this path. And then we can come back and talk about the expenses and all those things. I know that Nicole's provided us a proposal, and we haven't really gone into negotiations or anything, but we have a really good idea sort of where that budget would be. And we'd also need to understand that TBID board supports using TBID funds to support these efforts, whether it's the conversion or recruitment for an executive director, and rehashing or revising the strategic plan. The general fund can't support those activities. It would have to be the TBID. So that I want to make sure that that's understood, and that voicing that in a motion would be helpful, I think, as well.
So before I open it up to public comment, Nicole, can you just give a 30-second resume of Civitas and John and your group and the history there?
Yeah, so Civitas, John Lambeth, our president and CEO, he was the primary author of the Property and Business Improvement District Law of 1994, which is the state statute that we use when we look at forming or converting over to TBIDs established under the 94 Act. We did work in Paso Robles. We've worked with Chuck at the countywide level. There are about 110 of these tourism improvement districts in California, and we've worked on over 90 of them, either on the formation, conversion, renewal, or as a consulting firm. while they're going through the process. There's 180 of them in the United States, and we've worked on about 120 of those. And that's working anywhere from, again, formation, conversion, modification to drafting state legislation to allow for the formation of those districts in those states. So tourism is our bread and butter. It's John hired me out of Visit California to work on these projects, as Visit California is a statewide tourism improvement district funded by assessment payers and going through voter referendums every 6 years to continue to pay that assessment district. So I'd say John's been doing this since 1994. I have been doing this for the past 7 or 8 years. So got a lot of experience behind you and a lot of knowledge and a lot of best practices as it relates to TBIDs and TBID management.
That's great. Thank you. And I can attest to, if you've done your research, John Lambert is the guy. If you're looking for an attorney to help form a business improvement district, a bid in the state of California, I think you can't find a more experienced candidate. So if you don't have any other comments, questions, we're going to open it up to public comment.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have one person in the queue, or a couple people, and I will allow Sean Green. You're on the line.
Hey guys, thank you very much for the work that you guys did on the breakout group, the committee work. When you're a member of the public and you just watch the TBID meetings, it's pretty easy to doubt that kind of magic isn't happening. And so it's so refreshing to see that work has been put in for Scott's presentation. So I very much thank that group for that. Going to the 94 law is an absolute no-brainer. If for nothing else, then the positive nature of it, as opposed to the negative reinforcement of the 1989 rule. 5 years is an appropriate window because no one can budget anything in 1 year or accomplish anything meaningful in that year. I do think that I worry a little bit in that the transition to an external bureau is eerily similar to what happened 5 years ago. And the work of the breakout group seems to indicate or validate the idea that we've essentially been spinning our wheels for like 10 years, which is pretty frustrating. In that same regard, do we really need to go out of pocket to pay an outside group to duplicate a process that took place 5 years ago? I don't know the answer to that. Perhaps it's worth that chunk of change just to avoid some of the pitfalls of that last transition. And lastly, I think it really comes down to, Joan just mentioned the need for a champion, and the champion has to come from TBID board somewhere. Someone has to be enthusiastic and get behind this process. It really comes down to that. You take a look at what Chamber does with one single person and the amount of advocacy that they are able to push through and get things done at the city level, and then to compare it to what TBID is able to do, and it honestly, it's really frustrating. And so we need an Erica Crawford. We also need one or more champions from the TBID group to get behind this and to bring the kind of enthusiasm and excitement that a SLOCAL meeting has, for example. So that's what I want to say about that. Again, thanks for the breakout group and the work that you've done. I look forward to seeing where this goes.
Great. Thank you, Sean.
Okay, next speaker will be Betty Winholtz. Betty, you are online.
Thank you. This is Betty Winholtz. I just have two questions. One is, what will the nature of the relationship be between the TBID and the Chamber? And my second question is, do the STRs, all the different owners, have to be part of that 50% plus one vote? And how will you get all of them on board? Thank you.
Hi, Betty. I can speak a little bit to this, and Scott, you can jump in here anytime, but I believe it's 50 plus one in terms of revenue paid into the TBID. assessment?
Yes, yeah, Betty's question's a good one. That's correct. So it'd be 50% plus one of the entire revenue generated. So I just, for background, I think vacation rental owners account for about 20% of the TBID assessment revenue generated, just to give you some context. So you don't need all of them to say yes to it for it to succeed. You just need 50% of the revenue generation to do so. Obviously, we'd want to have more than that. If that to the previous commenter's point, to the passion, the excitement, that you would want to go into it with a clear kind of consensus amongst the industry.
And Betty, in terms of the chamber and the relationship that was discussed, I can't speak for the board, but at least the breakout group summarized that we wanted to open it up nationally. To kind of echo my previous comments, it's a great time to be hiring, especially in the tourism realm. So we don't want to discount anybody, and maybe, the road leads us back to Morro Bay, but we want to really evaluate, what type of experience and talent is out there before we make the final decision.
Yeah, and I would add to that a good question, Betty. To that is that the chamber is an important agency with regard to the local economy, and one of the efforts we were trying to make up till the COVID hitting was sort of better integrating and coordinating amongst TBID and the chamber. But at this time, there's no thought about them taking it over. Certainly would be open to that if that was a route that we wanted to go. But as Chair mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity to look outside of Morro Bay to do this.
Great, thank you. Any further public comment?
At this time, Chair, there is nobody else with their hands raised in the queue.
Great, thank you. Does anyone feel comfortable making a motion or recommendation to City Council?
Before we make a motion, I have a couple of questions now that we've had some public comment. One of my questions is when we talked about using Civitas and John Lambeth as a guide for this. One of the, Sean Green just said that, we didn't want to repeat the mistakes of last time. The big, I would say, roadblock or hurdle for the success of the TBID has been that we are on the 89 Act and that we have not been able to move to a 94 Act and have a 5-year really good, strong strategic plan. When there was a 501c that was running this previously to the city bringing it fully in-house and onboarding it as a city function, it was still a 1-year window. So even when the executive director was hired by the TBID, they were hired and the contract read, your job will only continue if funding is approved by the city council every year. So, how successful can you be as an executive director if you have that, 6-month process for a 1-year window hanging over your head? So I think that is important for us to know. And then I'm wondering what the board feels about, we have to identify eventually, or pretty quickly, I think, the champion from the board who's going to carry this through and do a lot of communication with the hoteliers and the vacation rentals. Just because they're 20% of the revenue does not mean that should be, set aside. They are a hugely important, diverse group of people in this conversation. Maybe what this group may need to think about for a future meeting is hiring an interim person, an interim, I don't want to say director, but an interim guide, liaison leader to move us through the process. And I think that's what Visit SoCal did prior to onboarding Chuck. I'm trying to remember, but maybe Chuck, you can answer that question. You might. I thought there was an interim, but maybe not.
No, Stacy Jacob was the executive director at the time, although it was a totally different model. She was a consultant who worked 20 hours a week for the organization for about a 3.5-year period. I came in, I think much like what you're suggesting, Joan, as a contractor to help establish the district, and went one-to-one to all the hotels. That's how I met many of you, getting those petitions signed to get the district off the ground. And then prior to the district being formed by the Board of Supervisors, the board asked me to take over as CEO. I think as I shared with the smaller group, there's a lot of opportunity. We've got a number of local people who are really engaged in Morro Bay and smart in the tourism space that could come in right now as a contractor and help you get these petitions organized and signed. I don't feel like it's a really heavy lift. And I have also, just for the sake of the full board, offered my personal help and support to help make sure that happens in any way it can be helpful. Morro Bay winning helps Visit SoCal win, and all of us win as a community.
Thank you, Chuck. And honestly, I don't think it's fair to single out one champion. I would hope if the board chooses to vote unanimously, that we're all going to champion this effort, right? That Terry's going to speak to the vacation rental owners, and that Amish, Chris, and I are going to speak to the other hoteliers, and Joan. Realistically, I know a lot of us don't have much bandwidth these days with everything else going on. Joan, you've been dealing with a mountain of issues this year. I think all of us. So if we work together and push this through, I think that's what I'd like to see. So any other comments?
No, I just want to see how I need to understand the process for structuring a motion, I think. The motion, would we as a group, I don't know whether we have to build consensus, Scott Collins, to have, not an interim, but what did you call yourself? You were a management district consultant? What did you call yourself?
Yeah, I was just a consultant. They just hired me as a consultant for the company to come in. I think my title at that time was senior director or something like that, for a public facing title. But I was simply consulting for the organization to help establish the district.
Okay, Morro Bay, I'm a resident here. I'm just going to tell you the consultant thing just puts your brain in a vice sometimes with how many consultants we've got going. No offense,
because I didn't have benefits. I wasn't a full-time employee, right? They hired me as a contractor to deliver a project. That was the purpose of my role.
And using the 89 funds, Scott Collins, is that something that we could also do? Or is that something, I guess, that the board feels would be also necessary here in Morro Bay? Remembering that we have 37 hotels and 275 vacation rentals. So we're talking about dealing with little over 300 entities, maybe 315 entities or so. And we're looking around, we're talking about that bandwidth that Steve just mentioned. So just keep that in mind. But Scott Collins, is that doable to hire somebody to kind of help guide that process?
Yeah, that's probably where I need a little bit of help because, Civitas or someone like Civitas would facilitate the nonprofit corporation formation as well as the conversion. So, I guess they wouldn't engage in the actual outreach and championing of this. Nicole, is that right?
Yeah, what we like to do is we like to put a steering committee together. So whether that be some of you as the board members and some members from the hospitality community, but we will help guide you through and put you on a strategic path to make sure you're communicating with all your 300 plus entities and giving you guys the best practices as it relates to, you're not going to talk to all of your 200 plus short-term vacation rentals, but we'll give you some tips and tricks and we'll help you launch a communication strategy to reach out to them, to let them know that you're going through this process and to ask them to engage. It's a little bit easier with hotels, and because they're there, they're on site. They usually live within the community as opposed to short-term vacation rentals. So we really do help guide you guys through that process. So I don't I mean, you could definitely look to contracting with someone to facilitate a very similar role like Chuck did for the county. But what we don't see that typically happen in destinations your size. We'll help guide a steering committee through the process.
Yeah, so what this comes down to is the question of bandwidth, and then sort of comparing that to your budget, which is constrained significantly. You're going to put forward money to support, the work of Civitas or someone like that. May want to put forward money to do a recruitment for an executive director, which, I don't know. I think that's $20,000 to $30,000 now, Chuck. I don't know. Is that right? Or is it much more than that? I haven't done one in a while.
20 or 30,000 for what, Scott?
For recruitment effort.
For recruitment, yeah. You're talking. I think we do a lot of work with Searchwide. I think we could help negotiate that for you, but it's probably somewhere around 20% of the. Oh,
it's right that they get the that's right. It's a fee-based thing. So so there's that we would have to take into account, and then if we want to do work on the strategic plan, there's some thought about how we want to do that. And put some funds forward. So just want to think about that, the holistic cost of carrying this forward. I think between the 5-6 of you and others that they probably could do that outreach without hiring somebody on contract. But I don't want to tell you. I mean, you guys be the one who are carrying this, so it's sort of up to you what you think would be best.
I'm sorry, I missed what the 20% fee was based on. I heard 20%, but what 20% of what?
The salary of ultimately who we hire, correct?
Okay, so we're talking about, okay, got you. Okay. But we could come back next month if we begin this process, go down this road, and Nicole is helping us, and all of a sudden we realize, okay, with COVID, with all the constraints that we have personally and with regulatory constraints that there are, we don't have the bandwidth. We could come back the following month and go out and hire somebody to an additional help on this issue if we needed to.
Yes.
So maybe we just I draw back on that, and if anybody else has anything to say, then say it. Otherwise, I can make a motion.
Yeah, John, I would just say on that note, I think you'd be talking about a couple $1,000s to get that done. It's not. I don't think you're talking about a big expense, and I'd even encourage you to consider a per petition cost, right? So you do it in a way of, I'll pay you $100 for every signed petition that you get, right? And so I'm happy to take that offline and help the group in any way I can, but I don't think you're talking about a big fee to accomplish that. And I've got you and I had talked about this before, but I've got some thoughts on some people that already have those relationships in the community and could be, could do it fairly easily, I think, and they still need the support of this group, but it would take the pressure off the group of having to go knock on hotel doors every day.
Excellent. Okay.
Does anyone want to make a motion?
So I would just encourage whatever motion you make, and Joan, if you're going to do it, just to make sure to talk about those 3 recommendations and then the funding, just to make sure that's so council.
Say that again.
The recommendations, those 3 recommendation areas. I mean, you can just lift them and put them into your motion, or just say we recommend the recommendations submitted by the task force or the stakeholder group, and then part of the motion also is that the TBID board support using TBID funds for this transition effort or conversion effort. Of course, you don't have to do that. I'm just saying it would be helpful to know if the board supports using TBID funds.
Yeah. So I don't have my screen is not allowing me. I don't have hang on one second. Sorry. I'm looking for my. Yeah. Hang on one second. Okay, so we are looking to make a motion that Okay, so I move to support the recommendation of the Tourism Working Group to move the current TBID over to a 1994 Tourism Improvement District law with a 5-year window, and to use Tourism Business Improvement District funds to hire Civitas to assist with the process. Does that include everything that you needed, everyone?
The city organization to a nonprofit, and anything on the diversifying our visitation, if you want to throw anything in there as well.
Okay, and as stated by Scott, we would include diversifying our visitation and our overall visitors to Morro Bay in the goals of the management plan. And let's see, what was the other one?
Transition to a nonprofit
Board of directors, yes, and transition to a 501c nonprofit. So altogether, we are moving from the 1989 law to the 1994 Act, hiring with a 5-year window and including improved and diverse visitation focus. We are also using TBID funds to assist to hire Civitas to assist us to do that, and we are transitioning to a 501c nonprofit board of directors to direct the management plan.
And those are all recommendations to the city council, correct?
Correct. Those are all recommendations to city council. That is correct, yes.
Good job, Joe. That was a mouthful.
Sorry.
Heather, no, you did good. Heather, did you get all that?
Yes, and I can also listen to the minutes again, but yes, I did. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not going to try and repeat that motion, but do we have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Amish. Any further discussion? So all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Good job, everybody. Well, for those that are here.
Thank you, everyone. Chair Allen, do you mind if we take a quick break for the next item? Next item might take a little while, based on.
How long do you want to take? 5 minutes?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Thank you, Chuck and Nicole.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you guys.
Nice meeting you.
Bye.
A big discussion in the community as well prior to the committee taking this on. The vote of 5-3 that there be no cap on commercial short-term vacation rentals. Sort of the reason there being that most of this activity is occurring where commercial activity is already occurring, so there isn't as many of those neighborhood issues involved. It's not always the case because there are some aspects of downtown sort of look like a neighborhood, but the group felt that we should just keep that as a no cap for now. Regarding residential caps, of course, this one there wasn't a clear consensus nor a really clear majority. We just put forward the 250 as it had the highest number of votes, but this one's certainly up for debate. 4 members had said let's keep it at 250, 3 had it 120, and 1 member had it 150. The Planning Commission took a swing at this part on Tuesday, and they felt 150 would be more appropriate. They haven't taken formal recommendations on that, but that's sort of where they're heading at this point in time. The concern from those 3 and 1 members felt that 250 is just too many short-term vacation rentals for a community of our size. Looking at the data we have from host compliance, we can deduce based on the number of illegal operations that there's probably 175 to 200 legally, regularly, or consistently operating short-term vacation rentals in the residential zone. That number's been depressed a bit during COVID for obvious reasons, but that gives you a sense of those who are consistently renting or more likely to rent than some of those who just get their permit, hold on to it for a year, and let it lapse. Maybe they think it was a good idea, or maybe they're trying to prevent their neighbor from getting one. But we see on average, 20 or more short-term vacation rental permits that are relinquished each year. So there is an opportunity to reduce the cap through attrition. The next area is a bit more complicated, and so I have behind this PowerPoint, I do have a live tool that we've built through our GIS system to demonstrate how these various density reductions efforts may work. But the committee, after a long discussion, came around on a 5-3 vote to require buffers between permitted short-term vacation rentals and residential zones only. The way that they're proposed it was that they actually use lots as separators versus a radius foot or measurement. So in other words, if you're a short-term vacation rental, the next 3 homes to your left or right cannot be vacation rentals. It can't be one across the street from you or kitty corner from that home, and it can't be one behind you and kitty corner from that home behind you. So an effort to try to create islands, if you will, around where short-term vacation rentals are islands amongst the sea of homes and not the other way around, which we have experienced or do experience now in certain parts of our community, like the beach track. So this would apply, at least by this committee's vote, to both home share and full home rentals. So we started this discussion prior to the committee, kind of using the measurement as the buffer. We talked about 200 feet or 250 foot buffers around vacation rentals, and no vacation rental can be in that proximity. We use this in other zoning designations as well, whether it's cannabis operations in other cities, for alcohol retail outlets or tobacco retail outlets. This is a common application. The Planning Commission had looked at 200 and felt that 250 may be more appropriate back when they were looking at this for the General Plan Local Coastal Program update. But what I'm going to show you and talk about right now, then I'll show you on the map. When we applied the theoretical buffer in the beach track area, we found that we would eliminate a significant number of existing permitted STRs just based on those conflicts. So I'm going to try to, wrong one, pull this up so you can give you an idea of what we're talking about. So, we did provide maps in the attachments and within the report to help try to explain this a bit, but sometimes doing a visual like this is more helpful. So what we're looking at here is the beach track area, and I'm trying to find where we have a lot of concentration. I think right about here is where we start to see a lot of compaction. So this is the beach over on this side of town. This is Beachcomber, where most of you are aware, and you can see there's a high concentration of short-term vacation rentals. These darkened lots are currently permitted short-term vacation rentals, and we don't have a lot of turnover of vacation rentals in this area. It's for obvious reasons. So what I'm going to do is apply these various buffers to give you a sense of where you start to create conflicts and how that could lead to elimination of a lot of short-term vacation rentals. So we'll start with a 250-foot buffer, and this is going to make the screen look pretty indecipherable, but I'll try my best to sort of demonstrate what I mean. So here's the 250-foot buffers that are applied. So these are just concentric circles that overlap each other all over the place. But what's key is when looking at Capri Street right here, or Capri Street at the corner of Capri and Coral, we have one short-term vacation rental. And this is the outline of its 250-foot radius. So it captures that vacation rental, and it gets these two vacation rentals, and it gets this vacation on this one. So a total of 5 vacation rentals would be eliminated based on this buffer. And again, I think the point of what we were trying to accomplish was trying to reduce an impact to any one neighbor or street. But what is happening on Capri and Coral may not really affect what's happening over here on Bali Street. So when we reduce that down to 200, it eliminates, the same home would eliminate, instead of those 5, it would eliminate 1, 2, and 3. And then we did then looked at 100, which is comparable to what I believe, or close to what Cayucas uses as part of the county's local coastal program. I think they use a 150-foot buffer around and then 50 feet behind. Again, trying to just deal with one street at a time versus having one vacation rental packed multiple blocks. So this is sort of the thinking that we went through, as the committee went through, and trying to find something that was manageable, that both addressed the density issue without getting rid of a lot of vacation rentals. So in summary, I provided this table to show the various methods that were considered and their impacts. So in the beach track area that we were looking at, there's a 44 short-term vacation rental permits. Utilizing that 250-foot buffer, there are about 25 to 30 plus conflicts created with that buffer, which means through a lottery system, 25 to 30 plus vacation rentals would be eliminated. And when I applied that same methodology citywide and looked at the entire map, it's more like 80 to 100 plus. And when we use the 200-foot buffer, that came down a bit to 24 to 27 in the beach track, 70 to 80 plus citywide. When you use the 100-foot buffer, 17 to 23 in the beach track and 50 to 60 citywide. And then the committee's recommended method of using, lot separation, if you will, is the method. That number is still 14 to 16 eliminated in the beach track, and 40 to 50 citywide. And so a lot of discussion kind of back and forth and marrying different methodologies, but that's what the committee recommended. The Planning Commission has looked at this on Tuesday, at least the initial discussions is maybe it's a combination of the committee's method plus a buffer, a linear buffer of some sort to, again, ensure that there isn't these situations where you have a bunch of vacation rentals on one block or surrounding one individual neighbor. Related to that, the group last took up the issue of what to do with non-conforming short-term vacation rentals. Let's say this moves forward with that methodology. We know we're going to have conflicts, so how do you address those? Some communities, they just allow attrition to address that. Others have shortened periods of time where you have to come in conformance or lose your license. The committee weighed a lot of different opportunities or options for that. But again, this nonconformity will really apply to the density issue. So the committee voted kind of across the board all over the place, but the most number of votes was that in 3 years, the city would check and see if there are any non-conforming short-term vacation rentals, and if there are, implement or a lottery system where there are conflicts, and those who lose their license to that process have 1 year to cycle out. One member felt a 4+1 methodology would be more appropriate, and there were others on the committee who felt like we need to move quicker to address these conflicts and nonconformities. And then one individual felt that there should be there should be full grandfathering and just let attrition do its job. Now the issue there is that there are some parts of town where attrition is much slower process because of there are more lucrative areas to have a vacation rental, most likely closer to the beach. So really wanted to thank the committee members who put in a lot of hours of time in meetings, Zoom meetings as we got closer to delivering this to this committee, as well as the own time they spent in talking to community members and those in the industry and doing their own research. Very, very valuable work, and they delivered great value to our community through their time and effort and recommendations. So the next steps are going through completing the Planning Commission review, who makes the formal legal recommendation to council, getting input from TBID. City Council will review and make adopt their ordinance, but it only goes into effect after the California Coastal Commission approves the ordinance. So we recommend that this committee kind of dive into the ordinance, but really focus your attention on the cap, the density grandfathering, and transferability issue, as the Planning Commission is really going to take on these issues, plus a lot of the nuts and bolts that are more zoning focused. So with that, I believe Scott Graham is still on the line, and you have myself to answer questions you may have.
Thank you, Scott. Well, I just want to acknowledge the immense amount of work that this committee put in, as well as yourself. That's some great information. But just, before we open the floodgates here, I just want to clarify that TBID is not making any policy right now. We're just reviewing this and making a recommendation to the City Council, and that your Morro Bay Planning Commission is also reviewing this, or has reviewed it, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Okay, questions, comments, board? Great.
I just wanted to, as a vacation rental representative, clarify who the vacation rental owner is. So I know that there are people out there who buy properties and exclusively use them for renting them out, but that is not all of who the vacation rental owner is. A lot of these people are using the property as a stopgap in between their retirement. They buy properties in Morro Bay. I sold several of them. And they use it as a 3 to 5 year stopgap in order to, when they retire, they can then move there full time. But in the meantime, it pays the property taxes. They can qualify for the loan because they're still working. So there are quite a few vacation rentals out there that fit in that category. The other ones that are retirees who use the additional income either by a home share or by using a granny unit type thing to supplement their income. So these are Morro Bay residents, a very expensive place for them to live. And as they get older, they're really, really depending on that income. And then I know of vacation rental owners who only rent the property out during the summer. They move out of their home and rent the property for a couple of months out of the year in order to afford to live in Morro Bay the rest of the year. So I just want, you to kind of realize that that's also who the vacation rental owner is. The other thing, as far as the attrition, I got my license back, vacation rental license back, a year ago. And since that time, there's been 30 new licenses issued after me. So there is a definite natural flow of people giving up their licenses and new people coming on board. So my concern definitely is putting neighbor against neighbor, one person who really needs the income against a neighbor who's using it just as a business. So, and the person who really needs the income, who's a vacation or is a full-time resident, could lose their income by using that lottery process of, if the density issue becomes an issue.
Terry, can you interrupt real quick? We want to keep the comments right now, questions for Scott, and it might be more appropriate for you to give the personal comments when we get to that point.
Okay.
But I think right now, I don't want to cut you off. We can bring you back when the time's appropriate, but just any specific questions for Scott on his report right now is what we're looking for. John?
Sorry, I had to get where I could unmute. Scott, do we know I've never seen the vacation rental application. On the vacation rental application, do we ask whether it's for the full home or whether it's a home share? Do we ask that?
No, we don't. In hindsight, it would be great to know that, but we didn't know what we didn't know when we formulated this ordinance back in 2016 and then renewed in 18. We don't ask for that information this time because the ordinance doesn't ask to differentiate between the two. We are doing some research within our system to see if we can decipher which ones are and aren't. There's some guesswork involved, but I think we can get to a realistic number, hopefully in time for the next planning commission meeting. Scott Graham may already have done some of that work, but at this time we don't ask for that in the application. Certainly moving forward, we would. So Scott, anything to add to that?
Just that we did get information from finance. I have a list of the ones that are potential home shares. And the way you determine that is when they register their addresses, when they register their applications, the address has the address of the rental and then their home address. And when they're the same, it's either one of two things. It's a home share or it's they have an ADU. And so we have, the list is about 48, it has about 48 units on it. It's pretty clear that at least 5 of them are ADUs because there's an A and a B. But some of the other ones, we didn't start doing the A and B thing until I started working here. And so some of the ADUs that were built prior to my arrival just had the same address as the house. So we have one of our intern folks doing the research right now, looking through the files. So that's the ballpark number though.
Thank you. And do we, on our vacation rental permit application, do we ask for maximum occupancy numbers? Like, do we have I didn't see like I'm asking these questions as a resident. Do we have a cap on occupancy? Have we per house?
We don't at this time, and that's one of the key areas that was discussed in the committee. Again, the ordinance was meant as a temporary thing to sort of ratchet down the expansion of STRs, but it wasn't meant as the permanent regulation. And so that's the work that we've done now with this committee is really addressed a lot of those. And one of those issues was a cap on number of occupants. And so we scoured a lot of the different ordinances, and that the 2+2 seemed to be the most commonly used cap on occupants.
Okay. And then it's my understanding, I have to say, I commend staff. Scott, I gotta hand it to you. Scott's actually, cannot believe that you guys got this far. I've been watching this issue for over 10 years here as a resident in Morro Bay, so I'm really glad to see it this far. And I commend the city council for really keeping the pressure to move it through all these different committees. I know that in 2016, there was like literally almost zero ordinance. It was just like a secondary thought line item. And we had, at that time, there was a count done and there was 175 vacation rentals. And at that time, in order to try and bring on and legalize the ones who didn't have not tickets, but who didn't have licenses through the city, and almost an arbitrary number was chosen. It was 250. And city council meeting, and it was raised from 175 to 250, which really caught the attention of a lot of residents here in town, right? And then in 2018, the word residential was added in as the cap for 250, and that further increased. That pulled out like 13 or 14, I think the report says, and moved them into kind of a commercial zone and allowed some of those people on the waiting list to come up. And so I just want to make sure that what we're suggesting here is somewhere between the 150, 175 number and 250 in the commercial zones, in the residential zones, and no cap in the commercial zones. And I'm wondering how the mixed use residences fall into that, because most of those are in a commercial zone. Does that mean that future mixed use, like let's say the Bank of America is developed and it becomes 2 stories of mixed use, how does that become, how does that then work, I guess is my question.
Okay, a couple of answers to the question. I'll start with, how they came up with the 250 originally as well. We had about 175 registered vacation rentals. We'd done a sweep using host compliance. We hadn't yet contracted with them, but we had them do one for us and identified another 50 that were operating without permits, and so that's where the 250 came from. As for what would happen, that example that you gave is great. Bank of America redevelops, we put residences upstairs. So the application, when they come in for the development, will have whatever commercial use they have on the bottom floor. And then on the upper floor, they would have to identify what they want that use to be. And that would go through a conditional use permit and coastal development permit process that would go to Planning Commission for approval. And they would identify what those uses are. And if they had a hotel motel use, it could include that. If they had residential units, then they would be residential units. And the only way to change those over to vacation rentals would be to go back through a discretionary review process to the Planning Commission to change that use, because this ordinance and the ordinance that we have currently identifies them as a separate type of use. So that's how that would work. So the city could hold tough and say, nope, you can't convert them. And so they would remain, residential units in perpetuity if the city wanted that to be the case.
Okay, thank you. Those are some of my questions. Thank you.
Scott, excuse me, I think maybe I just got it answered about the 250 and where that came from. I think I had mentioned in a previous meeting that I thought maybe 250 was even too restrictive. But after reading through all this, it's fascinating. I see everybody's concerns. But I started thinking about 250, and on a busy time of the year, just for purposes, say those were all rented out and they have 4 to 6 people in each house on average, that's 1,000 to 1,500 people added to the community of a population of 10,000. So theoretically, you could have 10% or more of the population living in residential neighborhoods that are here for tourism reasons. So that makes me start to wonder if 250 is the right number or even too high. And I think before I thought maybe it was too low. I just wanted to clarify that from reading. And as complex as this issue is and the amount of time you guys put in, which is extraordinary, I do think the one key from the outsider is going to be enforcement. That's what kind of bridges that gap between both sides. The property owner, I see the property owner rights as this is my property, and if I want to rent it out, I should be allowed to rent it out. And I see the other person, the property owner's rights is, hey, I've lived here, this is my community, I want to know who my neighbors are on a day-to-day basis. So you have those two battles where enforcement, I think, can bridge it, because if somebody is doing a poor job of managing their vacation rental and causing distress within that neighborhood, then there are fines or a loss of their permit or a loss of their license. I just see that as being the big key. Now, how that's paid for, we got to figure that out. Is that through fees to STRs? Is that through the penalties themselves? I'll let the bright minds figure that out. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's an excellent point. I think that was where there was the most commonality, both in the town hall meetings and community surveys and within the committee itself, that enforcement could address a lot of issues. It doesn't make the density issue go away, of course. Our goal and the goal of the committee was to create a reasonable enforcement mechanism and one that's funded. and consistent. And right now we have one code enforcement agent in the city. We did have to let one go, or one left, and we haven't filled it because of our budget constraints. So the expectation in my mind is that we would probably have a dedicated enforcement agent just for vacation rentals when this is completed. We are aided by the host compliance online tool, at least to know who's operating illegally, but you still need an agent to go and kind of carry out the due process piece. So having somebody for that and helping with inspections, and then addressing kind of the residual effects of, noise, parking, trash, all those other issues, we do have to go through the due process to ensure that an infraction did occur or a violation did occur, and then look at fines. The most common way to fund that, you don't want to rely on fines because that sort of incentivizes going after people for maybe violations that are non-existent, is you use the fees to do that. You want to set your fees at a reasonable rate. You don't want to make it entirely cost prohibitive, but it should pay for itself. And so currently the fees that are assessed on vacation rentals pay for the host compliance, the application, and I think a modified or minor inspection. So if we were going to do real enforcement, consistent enforcement, there would be an additional add to that fee to accommodate that. So we'd probably land somewhere in the 500 to 700. I don't know. We don't know exactly where range for that. And there was discussion in the committee that maybe hosted STRs would pay a little bit less because they're maybe less likely to have those issues because you have a host on site. But again, everybody across the board, enforcement is absolutely agreed upon and necessary. And part of that also is our responsibility is the city is to provide a hotline for people to call, make it easy to access the information. So they don't necessarily have to call the police department, but at times you do, right? If it's a real emergency. But we want to make it easy and opportunities to do that online, to keep it confidential. Of course, it is confidential by phone call, but some people just don't want to call. So we want to help facilitate that process as best we can.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Out of respect for the work that the committee accomplished, can we drill down just for a moment on the members of the committee? I know there were 3, I believe, members of the public. There was 3 vacation rental owners. There's a hotelier.
The planning commissioner.
Planning commissioner. Okay.
Yeah.
In the staff report, it showed that some of these votes were relatively contentious. But can you give a little bit more information on these folks and kind of how they were selected, just so we can absorb and maybe get more out of the data here?
Yeah. So we had some people, most people just reached out to me directly. Others were recommended, mostly just came through, folks who were interested. And those are the people you want to pick up, because they're motivated. And then I had just discussions with each of those individuals who were interested or had been recommended, and to assess, kind of fit and making sure we have a good balance. That was why we wanted to have folks who kind of represented the diverse viewpoints. It probably would have been helpful to have an odd number after thinking about it after the fact. But I interviewed all of them and was the commitment I heard from each of them was, look, I represent my perspective, and I'm gonna go into battle for that. But I also understand there's a different perspective on the other side of the table, and I need to honor that. I need to hear that. I need to learn from that. And commit ourselves to using best practices to make decisions, and try to find consensus. So they all committed to that before I selected them. So that's where it came from. I'd be happy to share the names. I'm not reluctant to, but if that's important to the committee, I can do that. But there was a vetting process, but the goal again was to create balance.
But there obviously, as you alluded to, there was some give and take, and people weren't just dying on their sword going into this, voting one way.
Correct. I mean, some of the votes were, if you want to call it party line, they may have fallen down on that. But it wasn't like, well, we're just going to vote. We had long deliberations, especially on those harder issues. And there was a lot of learning going on in the process. But, there's 15 pages of ordinance, and 90% of that was through consensus, which is fantastic. So we started with some of the easier items for the folks to kind of get to know each other and go through that process before we got to the meatier subject matters. But even in those harder discussions, there was still a lot of listening, respect, sharing of ideas. Sometimes you just can't, you're not going to find compromise. It's just hard. But they tried their best, that's for sure.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Scott?
Yeah, Scott, I noted that the report said that the committee voted 5-3 for no cap in commercial zones. And they voted, they voted, actually a majority voted for less than 250, but 250 had the most consistent votes. So together, between the folks who voted for 150 cap in residential and the folks who voted for 120, I think, cap in residential, that was a larger proportion of people on the committee than the 250 vote.
It was actually split. 4 of the 8 picked 250, and then 3 had 120 and 1 had 150. So it was sort of kind of right down the middle, right? As far as there was 4 who said it's 250, and then there was 4 who said no, it's less.
What did the Planning Commission say about that, if you don't mind me asking?
They didn't take a formal vote yet, but the discussion and sort of circling around on consensus was 150. They kept the commercial separate and no cap, and different from the committee. They also said, the home share situation is different, and we think there should be no cap on those. So that 150 would only apply in their minds to full home rentals. And as Scott mentioned, there's probably about 40 or so that are potentially home share of the 250. So, and you couple that with, attrition that we experience, you could start to get down to that number. There was discussion at the Planning Commission anywhere between 150 to 250. Some people thought maybe 175, but that at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, let's put 150 out there for a placeholder for now. And I imagine the Planning Commission will come back to that discussion when they meet again in September.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for Scott?
I have one. It seems like it'd be extremely difficult to determine if someone gets their license based on that they're an owner occupant renting out rooms. How do you see that as an enforcement? That the enforcement of that would be very difficult to determine?
I'll leave it to Scott, who would oversee that function.
No, it wouldn't be difficult. We would know whether they live there or not. Our code enforcement officer now, is here. He's here 3 days a week. We would be probably hiring another part-time code enforcement officer to do the enforcement on vacation rentals once the ordinance gets adopted. And we'll know whether they're here or not. And also the application requires them to identify where they live. So.
I have a question about the ADU. Now, ADU is kind of a new terminology. It's come in the past, I don't know how many years, but there's a lot of legal granting units. So does that, when you're speaking about ADUs, does that include legal granting units or legal non-conforming granting units?
The ordinance, as it's written, prohibits, as does currently state law, at least my opinion, prohibits the use of accessory dwelling units as vacation rentals now, and that took place at the beginning of the year. So this ordinance reflects that. We have existing ADUs, and the city can make a decision about what they want to do with those. We're going to get the total number of those out of this, search we're doing through the home share, list and that type of thing. And once we have them, we'll know how many we have. It's probably just a handful. And the ordinance right now would have those term out in 3 years.
And let me just add, as of January of this year, it became a lot easier to get an ADU in the state of California. You know, for the most part, you don't even have to go for a planning review. You can just go for a building permit. You know, municipalities aren't looking at parking and things like that. So the goal here, and, you know, Scott can attest to too, is, you know, the state is really making an effort to create more housing, more affordable housing.
That's the point.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
Just one. I want to address apartments. Sorry, I have to get all this square in my mind. And it was pointed out to me that apartments are a 1-to-9 ratio. In other words, 1 vacation rental per 9 apartment units. There are certain areas of town that have some larger apartment buildings. Are apartments, or was there any conversation about apartments possibly being restricted to home share instead of actually turning the entire apartment unit into a vacation rental? It seems to me that even having apartments on here removes affordable housing for our, you know, working families within our community. And so I know that not all of our low-income housing developments are restricted, but apartments, it seems to me that, you know, multifamily dwelling units like that would be restricted from this. I'm curious why they weren't.
No, there was a good discussion on that. I don't recall strong feelings on this one. I think it was more on the ADU and the affordable housing kind of designations and and mobile homes. I felt that it was imperative to not move forward with those. As it's mentioned in here, the ordinance, yes, it's no more than 1/8 of the total number of units in a multifamily could be used for vacation rental. Certainly home share could be kind of added to that. The only caveat there is that a lot of times folks who do home share kind of create different entryways into their home, or kind of like sequestering so that they don't have the run-ins, if you will. It's sort of like a separate part of the home. That would be harder to kind of create those modifications in an apartment situation. But Scott, I don't know if you had any more to add to that. But Joan, I don't recall there being a significant amount of discussion amongst the committee. I don't think we have a ton of vacation rentals as it is in our apartments. But I
mean, we do have a few vacation rentals that are in apartments. Again, it's a handful. There's not very many of them. But other than that, I wasn't involved. I wasn't at the meetings where that discussion took place with the committee, so I don't really have any perspective on that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Scott? Okay. I think we want to open it up to public comment at this time.
Yes, sir. We have one person in the queue. And Sean, you are online. You are online, Sean?
All right, guys, this is Sean Green. I was on the vacation rental committee, and I just want to thank all members of the committee for really doing a lot of hard work and keeping it civil from start to finish, just like Scott said. There was great consensus on maybe 17 out of 20 items, and the great news is that out of all the agenda correspondence I've seen this week in Planning Commission and TBID agenda items, almost all of the neighbor concerns have been addressed by this ordinance, which is really the main goal of having this meeting and coming together and seeing what the issues are and addressing those. So that is the good news. Regarding caps and buffers and transferability, obviously those are the trickier ones, and there were some split votes here and there, but we can still come to a consensus with some give and take. And Scott Collins mentioned today there's roughly 210 active permits. around 35 of which are non-compliant, which if you do the math is down to about 175. Plus, we're factoring in a minimum TOT threshold of roughly $500 a year in this ordinance. So attrition does happen, and I imagine Terry will get to this at some point as well. Taking that even further, regarding that cap, which seems to be a major concern of the public, probably the biggest concern in all the agenda correspondence, as a vacation rental owner, I'm sympathetic to that cause, and all other things being equal, I'm certainly open to a reduced cap. There are a number of factors, though, regarding that cap. So if we are going to go down to a number like 175, then there has to be some sort of give and take regarding smaller buffers. Possibly we address non-transferability, or more importantly, we just allow attrition to take effect, which will get us to that number, whatever that number may be, over time. It's very difficult to stomach as a citizen who's been legitimized as a vacation rental owner multiple times by the city to then have my permit potentially be revoked. From a planning commission standpoint, certainly an approved building would never be forced to be taken down after the fact and retroactively enforced. So that's really, from a vacation rental permit holder standpoint, that's tough to stomach, and that's where we ask TBID as our appointed representatives to stick up for us as good players in this game, and I hope you move forward in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Any other public comment?
Yes, sir. Next speaker, Maggie, you are on the line.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm Maggie.
Hi. Yeah, well, I wish I had 10 minutes to talk because needless to say, I have a lot to say about this. But I have to tell you, I feel like I'm living in two parallel universes because I also served on the committee for the direction of the tourism. I see the enthusiasm of our business community and our hoteliers and everyone, and all to push this forward for tourism to do the best we can to create tourism. By bringing us into the TBID in January, it was an acknowledgement that SDRs are a valid and very much desired lodging segment, all of that, and then to turn around and on the other side, hear the community just do everything they can to shut us down. So as I say, I live in two different universes here. I feel like I second what Sean said, that I feel like we've done so much with this committee to address a lot of the concerns of the community. So my big push is let these things take place. We've got some fee some permit fees defined to help fund the code enforcement. Let's do it. We're going to put the contact information up. We're going to manage parking. We're going to set a minimum age. We're going to manage occupancy. We're not going to transfer the license through sale. So my big thing is, my main thing is for these people who have been operating for many years in full compliance, to then arbitrarily set forth 2 or 3 years down the road that their license is going to be taken away. That contradicts everything. So on one hand, we're paying into the TBID to improve our business, and then for that same person that's paid in all these years, then you're going to pull a license. I really am a big, strong advocate of letting attrition take care of this, and I think it will for the most part. There may be little pockets where it doesn't, but what we have to remember is in those areas, particularly in the beach tract, this is our closest ocean, closest accommodations to the ocean, and I think the Coastal Commission is going to weigh in very heavily on that to say SDRs do provide the most affordable housing for people to access our beaches. So for me, I can live with almost everything else. I can live with a reduced SDR license number, everything. I cannot, our biggest concern, certainly of all my owners and everyone I've spoken to, is this concept of the lottery actually going in and taking away licenses from people. So that's my big thing. I hope all of you guys got a chance to look at the Chamber of Commerce report that they did, because they also took a very strong stand on letting things take care of itself by attrition. And I really, really look forward to seeing if we can't come to a peaceful existence with the community based on all the new, more stringent regulations and the enforcement of those. So thanks, you guys. It's been an honor for me to serve on both of those committees, and it's given me I love Morro Bay and I want to do the best we can for them, but I also want to strongly advocate for keeping STRs as a viable and important lodging segment for our town. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Appreciate the comments as always. Any further public comment?
Yes, sir. Next caller, Betty Winholtz. You are on the line.
Thank you. This is Betty Winholtz again. I'll speak from the residents' perspective, since you've heard too from the business perspective. I've had the idea that, and I think a lot of residents feel this way, that we have no issue with hosted vacation rentals. You can make those unlimited and we don't care, because we know there's someone in the building to keep things under control. And if that is true, you would not even need to hire an enforcement person, because that person already exists in their own home. And so that whole piece of concern goes away. And there are towns that have restricted unoccupied homes and not allowed those, which gets me to a piece of language. And I see that the committee, and maybe this is my ignorance, have used the term shared and non-shared. And to me, and maybe this is my old vacation time, that sharing houses was when you exchanged with someone in another state or another country, and that hosted and non-hosted are the current terms. And I just wish that TBID would weigh in on that language, if they would. Another point that I'd like to make is, if you are going to continue with the hosted, that certainly the 150 is where the residents would be. And just so you know, Los Osos and got past their ordinance, which they had asked for a 9-lot separation and 500 feet, and the county planning commission took out the 9 lots, but they left the 500 feet distance. And this is linear feet. It's not, in a circle like the picture that you saw Mr. Collins give, but linear feet. So if you would consider that as well. And let's see, was there one other thing? I think those are the main points that, and I would speak up for those people who live in our mixed use commercial areas, because that they live there. I mean, that is their neighborhood, and to exclude them from a cap, I think is not beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Any further public comment?
Yes, sir. Next caller, John Weiss, you're on the line.
Well, for one more minute, I guess it's still morning. It is, I'm just honored, or not honored, that's not the right word. I'm just impressed with the work that the Planning Commission and the different committees have done on this very important issue. I did sit through the Planning Commission. I did do some research. I've noticed that both Paso Robles and San Luis Obispo only have hosted. As Betty referenced, the county has both, and of course we have. We don't know what we have. I do agree with what the lady mentioned about the lottery. I'm generally opposed to the lottery. I would prefer to let attrition be used to reduce the number of vacation rentals. and I love the ideas that were suggested earlier. And so I would like to just offer that. I do have a concern about the impact that it has on the hotels, and I do plan to speak with a hotelier Monday. But I'm largely in favor of the Planning Commission's recommendations of reducing the number of hosted units and the different guidelines that they have, because there is an issue. It is I'm campaigning for mayor, and it's in the top 2-3 issues that our citizens have, and so it's something that's very dear to me. So with that, I thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you, John. Any further public comment?
No, sir. At this time, there is nobody else in the queue with their hands raised.
Okay. Board discussion. Terry, did you want to share some comments now?
Sorry, I'm in a hotel and it's checkout time, so unfortunately I'm going to be a little bit rushed. But I think that what you can see is being reiterated over and over again is that the attrition thing is going to be really important. I think the committee did an amazing job with coming up with the regulations that they did and finding common ground. But this one item in particular, again, we just
kind of cut now, Terry.
Neighbor against neighbor, one person losing one to see this come into effect.
Terry, you might try stopping your video and just leave your audio open.
Can you hear us, Terry? Okay, well, Terry, if you can hear us, the recommendation was to stop the video so we can hear your audio. I know you have some comments that we all want to hear, so hopefully you can log in. Any other board discussion?
So in terms of what I'm thinking as the resident on the board, I'm just a resident here. So in terms of what I'm thinking, I just want to say thank you so much to this committee. They really poured over this and really hammered this issue out. And I can see where this would have been like everybody trying to get their issue on the table and their point across. So I appreciate the city council people and the staff who worked through this with everyone. I think that the document is really pretty strong. For me, I like the idea of having non-transferable with the sale of a house, or I don't think that vacation rental permit should be transferable and be used as a carrot during the sale of a home. I don't think that's right as a resident. I don't want to see that happen. So non-transferability, I think, will help with the attrition and will help naturally cull down to whatever number is eventually established by the council. So I would allow I am pro allowing the attrition to occur naturally. I'm pro having non-transferability. I really like Ms. Winholt's suggestion of using hosted and non-hosted as the standard language, because that is the standard language that, that we even use as a board, right?
Joan, can I interject on that? Do you mind? Because it's an excellent point, and the committee started with hosted versus non-hosted. And then when we ran into issues in actually drafting the ordinance, because host is the person who's there, but also the person who oversees the vacation rental. So we ran into a trick of like having having different definitions for the same term. So we see places like Pismo have used home share as their differentiator between that and an unoccupied or unhosted situation. So I realized that was where we wanted to go, but we ran into trouble because host is used elsewhere in the ordinance. So but we hope the intent is the same. Sorry to cut you off. Just want to make sure.
No, that's fine. Now, having a good understanding of that. And then I feel as a resident, I have really strong feelings about apartments being used as vacation rentals. I just don't think it's right. When, my dad owns an apartment building and over in Albuquerque, and, apartments are apartments. They're meant to be affordable, beginning family housing, young married couples, retired people who can now retire and afford to live by the beach, who don't want to have lawn care. They don't want to have all these other burdens placed on them. And I am for having the apartments fall out due to attrition naturally, but having apartments excluded from being vacation rentals in the same way and with the same reasoning that mobile home parks are excluded. It is much, much, much the very same thing. And I think that we're limiting our ability to have affordable places for people to live in if we allow apartment units to become vacation rentals. That's my own thing as a resident. You all don't have to feel that way, but I feel very strongly that that's an important element of having affordable housing here in our community. And I'm not saying pull the plug right now. I am saying allow it to happen through attrition. And if they're non-transferable, I think a lot of the attrition will happen too.
Great. Thank you, Joan. I see Terry's back on. Terry, you want to finish your thoughts?
I think I've pretty much covered it. Like I said, I think that the committee did an amazing job finding middle ground. It's not going to be perfect for everyone, but just that attrition is going to be really, really important.
Okay. I'll put in my part on this. I have opinions on all these various issues, but I'm going to trust the committee on 99% of them, even if I disagree on some of the small ones. But the big one still is that attrition part. And that's, we're a hotel owner, but we come from that business perspective, maybe that the other gal talked about. But as from a business perspective, and there are people who are utilizing these somewhat as a business and maybe made a purchase as a business, right or wrong, that's been allowed to this point. And I think to take that right away is problematic, and it's just not fair. So I too agree in the attrition module in that. And I'd have a hard time, giving any endorsement to whatever our recommendation is going to be if the attrition is not part of that.
I agree with you, Chris. I think, the reality of 2020 and the pandemic recession, and I think there's a real possibility that the state of California imposes a split roll tax and does away with Prop 13 for, non-owner occupied properties. So thinking all of that and then taking away somebody's license to generate some additional revenue just doesn't seem right. So I'm a firm believer in attrition as well. I'll be honest, I think there's too many vacation rentals. I think there's too many hotel rooms in Morro Bay too. You've got 10,000 people and 1,000 hotel rooms. That ratio is extremely high. But having said that, I agree with Joan's comments that naturally some of these licenses will go away. If you're selling a beach home, again, as Joan said, what a great carrot to have a license there, even if you're not using it to rent it out. I know for a fact folks have been paying the $500, even if it's not on Airbnb or VRBO, just to have that as an additional selling point to give more value to the property. So if that goes away, I think the number will naturally decrease. But, I agree with you, Chris. I'm a firm believer in this economy to go the route of attrition, just out of fairness, for the folks running this as a business. Amish, what are your thoughts?
I definitely agree with Joan about the apartment situation. I firmly do believe that apartments are affordable housing, just as well as ADUs, whether they be taken out by attrition or be put in the same classification as ADUs with a 3-year clause. I would definitely support that. The committee, I believe, did a really good job at both addressing a lot of the community concerns, as well as standing up for VRs to make sure that it was not too one-sided, that they were able to continue to do their business. As for the lottery, it provided a very unbiased approach as to how to approach who gets to keep their license and not. Obviously, it's not the most perfect approach, but depending on what the Coastal Commission and Planning Department comes up with, there might be a better solution. But at that time, I think the lottery is just the most unbiased and reasonable approach to addressing this issue.
I'm sorry, real quick. I was just going to say, you probably are going to lose a lot of people anyway, because they are not going to be able to have the parking that is required and all of the other restrictions, as opposed to the density. So you're going to lose a lot of licenses that way anyway. And then the new licenses coming in are going to have to abide by those density rules. So again, I think that we're going to have a pretty easy turnover. And thank you for understanding with the COVID and everyone else. A lot of vacation rental owners are struggling. A lot of them don't want to even rent right now because they don't want to have people in their home or deal with the cleaning rules. So now is a really tough time to be making that hard and firm decision on a number of years when we have no idea how many years this could potentially go on at this moment in time.
Great, thank you. So ultimately, we're looking for a recommendation to go to City Council. So does anyone feel strongly that we want to alter from the previous recommendations or the recommendations of the committee? Those are the specifics we need at this point.
What I'd recommend, Steve, is you probably just say move forward all recommendations with the exception of, and then outline that like Ms. Solo has mentioned the apartments. 4 out of the 5 of you have mentioned attrition only versus, or basically I would look at that as full grandfathering versus the 3-year and then lottery. So you want to, as much as you can specify where you have as a group consensus around differences, but I would move the whole thing in its entirety and then just outline where you differ from them, if that makes sense.
What page in the, do we know what page that recommendation is on? Sorry, I'm
it's not, there's no recommendation, but I think, like I said, you could just say we move the recommendations of the short-term vacation rule committee with the exception of, the following.
So, but I guess I'm curious about the 250 number in the residential area to see, I didn't hear anyone on the board saying what number, is there a number? I don't want us to use an arbitrary number. 700, 200, just pick one out of the air. There were some numbers that they discussed. And then there was a discussion that there should be no limit in the commercial areas. So, that's an important, I think that's one of the most important things that the community is concerned about. I'd like to see they ended up recommending commercial zones, non-restricted, and that, one moment please. And I think it was a 5-3. The committee by vote, 5-3 voted there should be no cap on vacation rentals in commercial zones with regard to stars and residential. 4 members of the committee voted to retain the existing 250. while 3 members voted for 120 and 1 voted for 150. I'm curious what this group is advocating for, because, hearing Ms. Jurin's comments about, they just started paying into the bid. We're talking about attrition happening naturally, but attrition to what number? Because right now, I heard staff say that there's about 210 that are active and in compliance, right?
212 that are active, 34 are non-compliant. Not really good at math, but that's I think that puts you in 170 to 180 that are compliant, that are active. Of course, COVID is playing into that, so that number is probably a little lower. But once you factor in the things like the added fee for enforcements, once you factor in the use it or lose it of $500 a year in TOT, I think that number will ratchet down. The Planning Commission sort of went through this process on Tuesday and came up with somewhere between 150, 175. They wound up saying 150 for now, but they also took home share or non-hosted, hosted, if you will, took that out of that equation, said we're not going to put a cap on those folks. And they also said let's not put a cap on commercial.
Okay.
Feel about those numbers, Terry?
I like the 250 if the hosted is included, but if we went to 175 and there's no cap on the hosted vacation rentals, I would say that's fair and agreeable.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded like Sean Green and Maggie tended to agree with that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think their issue was the lottery, Chair Allen. It was just that the arbitrary nature of the lottery was their main concern.
Can the committee hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I lost my video feed, so I can hear you all, but I can't see. I can make an attempt to make a motion if people are ready for that.
Please.
I make a motion that we accept the the short-term rental committee's recommendations with the following changes. We would like to remove, we would like to add an attrition element to get within the recommended short-term vacation rentals in Morro Bay. We would like to exclude new licensing and renewal of existing licensing in regards to apartments within the community. And we would like to limit the number of short-term rentals through attrition to 175.
With no cap on hosted, correct, Chris?
With no cap on hosted, if that's important to the committee. Yes, I'll add that.
I can second that. Will we discuss it further?
Any further discussion?
And I just want to be clear, Scott Graham had said that there were 38, I think, to his count, hosted. Is that right?
There's about 40 that we're looking into that could be a combination of ADUs or hosted. Probably most of those would be hosted. Correct, Scott?
There's the numbers almost 50, which I was pulling out the ADUs that I could identify right immediately. So I thought there was about 40-ish of the hosted. Yes.
And the ADUs are going to fall off naturally because of the new California state law, correct?
Not naturally. By prescription, 3 years, they would lose their license. Post enactments. Of course, we know the Coastal Commission will take some time. So it would be at the point of enactment, which is when Coastal approves it, then it would be 3 years from that date. And you could apply that same thing to apartments, or you could just say apartments, you lose it, or they can be attritioned out.
There's a slight tweak to that, Scott.
There is. Okay.
When it takes effect, it would be the effective date happens, and then it would be 3 years from the first time they renew.
Okay.
I've been just shortening it to 3 years, but it'll be a little longer than that.
Got it.
Just in case anybody actually was,
And there's part of the recommendation was for the city council to review this 1 year after enacted, right? So if all of a sudden this hosted area swelled to 500 vacation rentals, they could really review that and, address it.
Yeah, that was the intent. Whether it be the council or there were some members of the STR committee, or they're all heroes, but some are even more so. Said, well, we'll just reconvene and we can do that work for the city.
The planning commission wanted the review as well.
Yeah, there you go. 2 boards.
Okay, great.
Is everyone comfortable with ADRs? I mean, personally, I think ADRs should be for affordable housing, not for vacation rentals, but are we just going to let the state language have precedent there?
Do we have a choice on that, or does the state regulation supersede ours?
Really, I think the question we would be asking you is, do the ADUs, are they part of the grandfathering piece?
What do you think, Terry?
I think that people who have been using them, not knowing that this new law was coming in, it would be a huge detriment to them to lose them at this point so suddenly. So it'd be nice to see them as part of the tuition as well.
Okay. So we have a first and a second. Any further discussion?
Can I clarify, just make sure we have what you all are putting forward and get a head nod? So it's moving the full report and recommending that to council, but instead of using the 3+1 lottery system, you're going to do attrition, prohibit them in apartments, and the new cap is 175, no cap on hosted or homestays.
That sounds accurate. Is that?
Yes.
What do you think, Chris?
And one clarification, is on the apartment piece. Do you want it to follow the ADU model, where in 3 years it would cycle out, or do you want to? Would that be a moment of enactment? They would lose their license, or is it through attrition?
I think Chris said 3 years. Did you say 3 years, Chris?
I did not, and I don't have a stand strongly either way on that. I'm fine with either of those, so if someone wants to debate that.
I had said 3 years for the apartments.
So we could have it mirror the ADU language, if that works for the group.
And just a quick question for Scott. The reason being for a no cap on the commercial district, was that because there are other businesses that list their properties on these home share websites?
It's that, and also that there's already commercial activity occurring in those areas. So, a lot of the concern raised by the community is that you have a business occurring in a residential area, right? And that's non-compatible in a lot of people's minds. Whereas this is a commercial activity taking place in a commercial zone. Who's to say what we should prohibit or not prohibit? Of course, you can't take that to the full extent. I mean, we do have to try to create the community we want, but that was part of the rationale.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
So I just want to clarify, are we including 3 years?
Yeah, what do we want for apartments?
It's Chris would have to amend his, what do we want for apartments here?
I would agree.
The original one, I had said that no new licenses and no renewals. So I was thinking that would be, how often do they renew your license? Yearly?
Yearly.
That I would stay with that unless the committee's against that.
It sounds like Amish is recommending 3 years for apartments.
What's the rest of the committee feel? The rest of the board?
I'm okay with 3 years because it gives them time to, get those apart. First of all, I think it's going to take some time, as Scott Collins mentioned, for this to walk through the process of becoming an ordinance. And, you know, I don't know if that's going to be a year, what we're estimating, 18 months, 24 months. I'm not sure with COVID.
Less than a year.
Pardon?
Less than a year.
Less than a year.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if the apartment owner is using this as an offset. I mean, apartments are businesses by their nature. So I don't know what's right. I mean, they could probably go out and get that rented fairly easily in this market. Rentals are going pretty fast, right? So it's, you know, I'll go with whatever the consensus is here. If we want it to be 3 years, then 3 years. If Chris is bullish about it being right away when this is enacted, you know.
I would agree with 3 years. I think that's fair.
I would add to this, and I'll just remind everybody that the number that we have is probably less than 5. So it's not a big impact. Whatever you decide it's not going to be a huge impact.
Well, then 3 years is fine. It's not a huge impact now. It'll just keep it from continuing in the future. So I would leave the part, no new licenses for apartments, though.
Okay.
Do you want to amend your motion, Chris, and have the seconder approve that?
Yes, I'll amend my motion regarding apartments. They will be subject to the attrition rules and the 3-year ADU.
Right. Okay.
And no new licenses, right?
Yeah, no new licenses.
And who was the seconder on that?
Joan.
It was me. That's acceptable to me.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All in favor, no opposed.
Oh.
All right. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to declaration of future agenda items. I think, Scott, we're looking to meet here monthly now going forward, correct?
Yeah, I believe all the way up to the holiday period towards the end of the year. I think there's 1 or 2 months off. But yeah, we're set for at least September, October, November. And I don't recall if it's December or January, both that we take off. So plenty of opportunity to kind of check in on the budget, see what council recommends from what you carry forward on the tourism stakeholder group, and checking in with Chuck and others on sort of marketing efforts. I think that would probably be a good setup for the September meeting.
Future item that I might suggest is, I don't know if that would come from Scott or from the other Scott or from TBID, but again, back to restrooms and trash, maybe an additional enhancement in those areas, and what TBID's relationship could be with that. I think we have a lot at stake there. I understand what Scott Collins was saying about our responsibilities more towards marketing, and I agree with that, but this is kind of a short-term emergency situation that I hate being that guy that just brings up complaints without solutions, but I don't know the solution either, other than spending more money, which none of us have. But if somebody can come up with something by next month for us to listen to, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Again, we discussed that fairly in depth with our subcommittee, and the recommendation that at least came from the moderator is that a separate bid be formed for the Esplanade businesses, including the restaurants. The restaurants came back and just said that the timing was not good for them with everything else going on, but we'd be happy to discuss that further. If you want to make that a future agenda item.
That would fix it long-term in the future. I'm talking about some sort of a short-term emergency plan to get us through the rest of this summer and fall. I think by winter, things may slow down, but maybe not. But something to get the trash off the streets and the seagulls carrying it around, it's definitely an eyesore.
Okay.
And
any other future agenda items? Okay. Seeing none, I will adjourn the meeting. It is 12:29. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.